Great. All right. Good evening, everyone. Well, welcome to the Council Transportation Committee meeting of January 30th, 2024. Well, the meeting will be started at 6:32 p.m. This hybrid meeting allowing public comment both in person and virtually. Instructions for addressing the committee virtually may be found on the posted agenda. We'll move on to item number 2, which is roll call. The Public Works Director will take attendance by roll call.
Thank you. Member Matichak?
Here.
Member Hicks?
Here.
Chairperson Kamei?
Here. Great. So we'll move on to item 3, oral communications. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the committee on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes during this section. State law prohibits the committee from acting on non-agenda items. Would any member of the public on the line like to provide comment on a non-agenda item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or approach the lectern. We will take in-person speakers first. So 1 moment, we'll wait for staff to display the timer. Great.
Yeah, actually, this topic just came up before the meeting started. I was wondering why this meeting isn't held in the main council chambers. I mean, one of the main reasons I'm here is because when you look at this meeting over Zoom, I don't remember exactly what it is. It's hard to look at. I mean, they don't show the speaker, or you can't see all the people and what's going on. So you can it's so much better being in person. But I was wondering why it can't be done in the main chambers where they seem to have better AV facilities. Maybe it's a matter of cost and we'll need somebody else to run it out there. I don't know. EPC meets there, right? Why can't you guys? That's all.
Great, thank you. Any other in-person public comment? All right, we'll move on to see if there's any virtual public comment. I'm not seeing any raised hand. Okay, great. So we'll close oral communications and we'll move on to item 4, which is approved minutes. The minutes for the November 28th, 2023 meeting are presented for approval tonight. Would any member of the public joining us virtually or in person like to provide comment on the minutes? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or approach the lectern. We'll take in-person speakers first if there are any. Okay, I'm not seeing any in-person or virtual hands for our minutes approval. So I'll take the item back to the committee for deliberation and action. Are there any corrections or comments on the minutes? Okay, come.
I'll just move to approve the minutes from November 28th, 2023.
Great, so committee member Matichak moves minutes approval, then seconded by committee member Hicks. So just raise our hands for a vote. That's all right. That's unanimous. Great, thank you. So we'll move on to item 5, which is new business. Item 5.1 is the interim Castro Pedestrian Mall Central Walkway Street Treatment Concepts. The presentation will be provided by Aruna, Transportation Planner, and Ramsey Tabejani, Gell Studio Project Consultant. And we'll start with the staff presentation.
Thank you, Ramsey. If you can pull up the first slide. Good evening, Chair. Thank you. I'm Aruna Buduna, Transportation Planner. As you know, the 100 to 300 blocks of Castro Street have transformed into a pedestrian mall with the council action in October 2022. As noted in the staff memo, a council ad hoc committee was created to review and provide feedback on the interim pedestrian mall design standards and implementation plan. The ad hoc committee directed staff to identify placemaking opportunities within the public use spaces on the 3 blocks of Castro. One of the potential areas for this is along the central walkway in the 3 blocks. What we are here to present are the decorative street treatment concepts for the central walkway to receive your feedback on the concepts and the color scheme. I do want to set the stage that these improvements we are presenting today are temporary that could be put in place for the next 3 to 5 years until the permanent pedestrian mall can be implemented. City's project consultant, Ramsey from Gell Studio, is here to present the concepts for us. GEL is an urban design and research firm focused on designing urban environments for people and places. They've worked on projects in the United States and beyond, and they bring their international expertise to Mountain View, where they have been working with us for the past 4 years on the Castro Industrial Mall project. With that, I turn it over to you, Ramsey.
Thank you so much, Aruna. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Perfect, wonderful. So thank you all so much. As Aruna mentioned, my name is Ramsey Bajani and I'm a designer at Gale. So today I'm going to do a high-level overview presentation to supplement the memo you all received. So the street treatment stretches across the 100, 200, and 300 blocks and falls within the center through zone, where we have a 16-foot designated unobstructed pedestrian throughway. As you can see in this corner section on the top right-hand side, this central walkway is flanked by designated areas for outdoor dining and other programming, such as the concerts, public seating that are there today. So the street treatment is not only an opportunity to visually unify all 3 blocks, but it's also an opportunity to provide some contrast and distinction between the walkway and the program zones. As mentioned, this treatment is contained within the blocks of the 100, 200, and 300 block, and is not going to extend into the intersections. We started this process by working with city staff to designate treatment criterion. These treatment criteria are the scale or coverage of the treatment, its visual effect, the ease of implementation, the treatment medium, which is closely related to the durability and maintenance of the treatment itself, and then also cost, which is obviously affected by all of these other criteria. Collectively, these criteria led to a design brief called the application premise, which was developed by city staff to guide the design of the street treatment concepts. Broadly speaking, this premise included implementation guidelines. So the treatment should be reasonably implementable by non-specialist staff. We wanted to aim for standard materials. So we're not designing anything that requires specialized tools or custom creations for the treatment. Ease of maintenance, making sure that the treatment can be updated relatively easily so that it can maintain a high standard of visual quality. And with this, approximately 50% ground coverage. This is a way of balancing visual impact, implementation costs, and maintenance costs, as well as city staff time. And finally, we went with the use of the City of Mountain View colors, which is not much of a design constraint. Y'all's logo is so nice, the colors are beautiful, but it gives us a jumping board and a starting off point to get into the visualizations of these concepts. So with that being said, first concept we developed is called ribbons. This concept uses 3 flowing lines to create a linear gesture that connects all 3 blocks. It also nods to the surrounding layout of the streets. So at the breezeways, where it ramps down to connect to the sidewalk, the 3 ribbons align to indicate potentially cross pedestrian movement. And there are also spurs that jut off of individual ribbons to indicate potential highlights in programming that could happen during the flanking program zones. And finally, whenever there is an overlap between the ribbons, we've added an accent color to give a little pop and dynamism that crawls along the route. The next concept is called interlace. And for this one, we dialed up the coverage of the street significantly. So this concept is more orthogonal and it plays with rectangles that scale up and down and rotate in color. So we get an ebb and flow of movement and coverage across the block. This visualization and pattern use 3 colors, but any odd number configuration would work. So we could potentially layer on more and more colors as well. This third concept, called interlace small, is a variation of the previous. And here we increase the cadence of the pattern by shortening the width of the rectangular geometries. So it gives a much more rapid sense of movement and coverage, despite maintaining a similar 70% coverage. So here we've gone with the voids to accent the breezeways, where the geometries ebb away. And what this does is also create opportunities for wayfinding or artistic treatments that could happen on later down the line. We're basically reserving a key space along a pedestrian intersection for any kind of future treatment. And finally, this fourth treatment is called Hopscotch Helix, and here we're experimenting with the opposite end of the coverage spectrum. So we're exploring what effect we can have with minimum application. Here, there's only approximately 25% application of the through zone. And so for this design, we're using a simple rectilinear pattern that's supplied in a zigzag fashion to create movement across the block. And then we've also added a darker accent color, which is randomly placed at a reoccurring pattern to bring a dynamic element to a relatively rigid and repetitious pattern. So those are the four concepts. I'm going to pass it back to Aruna to recap the VAC meeting.
Thank you. We brought these concepts and presented to the Visual Arts Committee on January 17 to seek their feedback on the preferred concept and also the color scheme. The committee recommended moving forward with the ribbons concept, the first concept that was presented to you. However, they did suggest on increasing the coverage as presented. The concept is about 55% coverage on the street. They suggested increasing it to up to 70%. As noted in the staff memo, staff can explore this option, but also as Ramsey said, we want to balance the coverage against the visual pop and how it looks on the street. This second item Visual Arts Committee provided was they approved the design with the colors as proposed, where we are using the Mountain View City logo brand colors. They recommended using the same colors for the treatments. And lastly, if you want to move to the next slide, Ramsey. And lastly, the committee recommended, they provided input on the color paint medium type as well. They suggested moving up to a next higher level paint medium, which is street bond pavement coating that is more durable than the acrylic asphalt. Staff suggests using the acrylic asphalt because of the ease of implementation and maintenance required for that treatment. We could consider transitioning to a higher level as suggested by VAC, which is street bond water-based pavement coating after a couple of years, if no design modifications are desired at that point. If we continue to maintain the ribbons concept, we could go to the different pavement treatment. Next slide, please. So we are here to seek committee's feedback today. Based on the feedback received, consultant will develop cost estimates for the preferred concept, and staff will bring this to the council for approval at a future meeting. That concludes the staff presentation, and our questions to the committee here are, next slide, please, Ramsey. Which central walkway treatment concept does the committee recommend, and does the committee have any feedback about the preferred concept? And does the committee have any feedback on the colors or the medium recommended by staff? Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So I think we'll start with committee questions. Do committee members have questions for staff or the consultant? I'll start with committee member Matichak.
Thank you. On page 3 of the staff report, it has $ for the different materials that can be used. And it looks like that's just the cost of installation. I was wondering if relative to each other, would the life cycle costs be like the same relative to each other, or would the acrylic asphalt maybe jump to a $3 sign because you have to redo it so often? Have we looked at that yet?
So that is our next step, to look at the, develop cost estimate, not just for the installation, but also lifetime cost estimates. Definitely, if you're using a thermal or different paint medium, the overall, the longevity of those mediums is long, so the maintenance effort would be less, but upfront cost is significant for those. So, but our next step is to do cost of installation and the maintenance.
Okay, so we don't have any sort of feel for this one?
No, we do not have, we have not done a comparison of the life cycle costs. What we do know is the acrylic paint is one that our own street staff can touch up easily.
Mhm.
So as we look at the wear, similar to how they do crosswalks and other margins, this is a paint that they can apply. Once we had a contractor put it in with all the proper lineups and everything, so they have the pattern to work with.
Okay,
The other applications, we would more likely have to bring in contractors or special equipment to take care of. Again, this is one of the reasons staff has suggested we start with the acrylic paint, because we really want to see wear and tear. We think the other ones would do better, but we could see, based upon the wear and tear, we would need to see what happens. And we're also just trying to think ahead in terms of what if somebody wants to make a change to this design in a couple of years. This is the one that's the easiest to remove and make some changes.
okay. And it's said in here that the VAC had concerns about the acrylic asphalt not being able to be power washed, but that's not what I read. I read that it could be power washed. It just doesn't last as potentially, if you power wash it a lot, it's not gonna last as long, basically.
Yeah, we do have, that's the concern was it would not last several power washing, maintenance efforts. It can last 1 or 2, yes, definitely over a couple of years. We do have paint that we have installed in 2020, if without carts not being there with the foot traffic, it's faring well. But it kind of loses the pop over time. So it needs to be touched up more regularly compared to other options.
Okay. Let's see. And which option or options would require the outdoor patios to shut down for a period of time while they were either being installed or maybe touched up? I'm not sure I saw that.
Again, we have not explored, explore the impacts of, which paint medium would require significance, but, no matter which medium we are using, staff will make best efforts to minimize the impacts to the outdoor patios. The points of, the need for coordination would be during, preparing the surface ahead of the treatment, and during the treatment, I think it's a paint medium, the odor or smell would be still less, I don't think that's a concern, but it's just the preparation, no matter which medium we are using, we may have some.
Yeah, we're particularly concerned about thermoplastic, for instance. It's a heated material, it may have more smell, it may need more room for equipment. It's more likely to require that we remove some of the fences in order to give the contractor plenty of room. The epoxy gravel, we would have to look further into in terms of the equipment required. We do feel that the first two, the acrylic asphalt paint and the water-based pavement coating may be less disruptive to the businesses.
Okay. Appreciate that. And remind me again, there's so many topics and facts and figures to remember as a council member. When would we expect to do the permanent pedestrian wall? So is this like a 10-year, 5-year plan?
It is very challenging to answer that question. If we had the money, we would recommend that we start doing major visualization work and planning and design work with the community in about 1.5 or 2 years. Take a good solid 1.5, 2 years to do that and get the design. So the earliest we'd be looking at is 5 to 6 years from now. And another reason for that is this is going to be incredibly disruptive to our businesses. We will have to dig up everything from their frontage all the way across to rebuild everything. So we wouldn't want to go any earlier than that anyhow, because we really need to give them a chance to recover. However, we haven't done any cost estimating for the permanent peg mall, but I'd say we need to expect that it is going to cost a significant amount of money that we have not yet identified. And we'll have to prioritize with some of our other major infrastructure projects and building projects that also are going to require quite a bit of money that we've not yet identified. So it could be 10 years.
Okay, thank you. Those are all my questions.
So,
Yes.
following up on that, one of Councilmember Madigan's questions made me wonder, when would you be applying it? I assume would it be at night after the business is closed down or in the morning or? Do you have plans for timing?
Downtown does have construction limitations, when the construction can take place, some activities. So, given that, again, this is a paint application, I believe would be during warmer months and during summer timeframe and daytimes. So, but, there is kind of limitations on when the construction can already occur in downtown.
But we would work carefully to see if we can stage it to happen during the time where, like, for instance, Mondays and Tuesdays are, many businesses are closed. They really don't see business pick up until later in the day. So we'd look at different options and we may have more flexibility, unlike the recent closure where in order to do all that work and all that paving, we had to completely shut down the Ped Mall. This one might present more opportunities for staging.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
basically my question, how much time it would take, can you stage it? Because that was a real interruption. It was really hard on the businesses, so. So I wanted to know what you were thinking and maybe we should think that through carefully. And then you said that maybe you want to use the acrylic in part because of possible design changes. Do you have any more information on that? Is that like completely hypothetical or was there some discussion in the Visual Arts Committee or do you have any more information on that?
Purely hypothetical. And no, the Visual Arts Committee did not discuss it. It's something we've never done before. And public reaction and everybody else's reaction could be super positive and everybody loves it. Or we could hear, could we do it slightly different? So we were looking at how do we keep our options open.
And then my last question is about the colors, and I'm not against the colors actually, but I just have a general color question. I'll just say I would probably go with what the Visual Arts Committee recommended. That's, I trust them to some degree and the designers, but and I generally like the colors. The only hesitation I have is that I kind of don't like stamping our logo everywhere in real life. I think there can be other inspirations for color and design than our logo, and I would hate to be stamping this everywhere we go. So just for the gentleman from, how do you pronounce it? Gail or Gail? How do you pronounce your firm?
Gail.
Gail? Did I
Yeah.
say it right? Okay.
Yeah.
What do you generally use for color inspiration in different places that you work?
That's an excellent question. It's also a incredibly wide open question. Oftentimes we'll try to take inspiration from the local environment for the colors that we use. In this case, much of the discussion was focused around the conversation we're having now, like the application materials, the visual effects. And so we really leaned on city staff to help us narrow down color option choices.
Yeah, I mean, I would think if we were like out in nature, which it's not, or if there were a striking, I don't know, it was an industrial area and there was something with an already striking color, you take a key from that. But downtown is kind of brown and, there's not a lot of color
This is
inspiration.
in downtown San Jose,
Uh-huh,
by the stadium, the Sharps
uh-huh,
Arena,
right,
and then this is.
uh-huh. I see. Okay, I'm being shown different
pulled up
visualizations
your- I
that no
know.
one else can see.
I pulled up your webpage.
Yeah, so I was just curious about color theory in general. Right now, I don't think there's a lot of color inspiration to jump off from. So, and these colors seem fine to me, but that was my just purely informational question. I think those are all my questions. Okay.
I had a question. So in the staff report, it talked about the council's the interim Castro Pedestrian Mall Ad Hoc Subcommittee. Can you remind me who the member that we?
I was on that. We were on
Lisa,
it. And
Lisa, Sally.
Sally, who got traded for Margaret.
Okay, thank you. And it doesn't still meet.
No, we ended.
Okay, yeah, I think I'd lean on, you know, the ad hoc committee members too a bit to, you know, in the placemaking that we're trying to have here, but thank you for refreshing my memory. I thought it was the same people. Yeah, minus me. Okay, so for tonight, we do have a recommendation from the Visual Arts Committee.
Yes.
I think that when when CTC has done this exercise before, we've had the opportunity to maybe narrow down the 4 options to 2. Is that something that we might be able to do, or you're just looking for the 1? Because I do know that our colleagues may want options, and so I didn't know if we were doing, like, will we be presenting all 4 or just the 1 after CTC reviews tonight? I wasn't clear on that.
We would share all 4 with the council, preferably making a recommendation to them on the preferred one, but that does then give the council the option to ask to be taken in a different direction.
I'm just thinking of something else that we looked at. Okay, I think that, okay, so another question. So for the concepts, are we able to, what I've seen in other communities when they've done treatments is you get to see kind of more of the aerial view. And I think that one of the things, I don't know how to phrase this as a question, but one of the things that I'm struggling with is the aerial view is such a different experience than I think what you'll have as a pedestrian or a cyclist or walking. And so I don't know if this is to the consultant or the staff, how do we kind of share that experience, or as we're narrowing down the options, and kind of how that might play into the flow too of how you might interact with the businesses? Or, you know, I don't know if that is part of it, but I know other places, they do these beautiful aerial shots and you see the full concept. Well, we will not be in a drone, so.
I understand. Oh, we did not create renderings as you're, probably suggesting, but the concepts kind of provide an eye level view as you're walking the street and down, it kind of providing your high level, 50,000 foot, 3,000 foot level view on how it looks like on all these concepts, like how do you see it from top down versus when you're on the street? But yes, we do not have the renderings to provide how it looks exactly on street for this aerial view. We did not create that, but we could, that's something we
Well,
could.
I mean, perhaps this is a question for the consultant, one of the things that we're hoping is whatever treatment that we choose will encourage people to go into the various businesses. And so for me, all 4 concepts are lovely, but I think in terms of does that have any impact on like the user experience in terms of going into the businesses? Or I know, for example, the ribbons you were talking about, they're kind of little like nodes that kind of go out, would that be, lead you to the front door of the business, right? So just kind of.
If I may, before you answer, one of the things to remember about these interim PEG mall is which businesses have patios may change over time. So as a vacant storefront fills with a dining establishment that wants to have a restaurant, we'll be adding one there. If one changes hands and the next owner doesn't want one, that will be removed. So this whole interim mall has been said to be very flexible and what you see happening in the program areas. And that means, the city is filling the other spaces with tables and chairs for the public, fun seating, games, and all that. We will be shifting around to be in different frontages based upon who has patios. So while I appreciate that concept of how do we lead them to the front doors, we can't do something that leads to every front door, especially on the 100 block. So what you see now is one that kind of provides your your key points of moving from the central walkway to the sidewalk, those mid-block crossings, that's where you'll see a change in pattern. And at the crosswalks, at the intersections themselves, but the rest, what hopefully invites people in will be the openings that you see in the patio barriers themselves as you walk along.
I'll just add, I think Don has it exactly right. We find that investments in the public realm collectively benefit businesses individually. So part of the opportunity with this treatment is to really create a unified, cohesive experience along the entire pedestrian mall. So we're not necessarily leading people to one specific business, but we're leading people along the entire corridor in turn so they can experience more of the public and also private opportunities that there are along the street.
Okay. Yeah, we get a lot of feedback from our businesses about how we're facilitating that. So I think, part of my earlier question was, I think that the renderings, like, I don't know if this is the 200 block or something where in the ribbons concept, they all kind of merge together. I can't tell if that's at a crossing or what that is in terms of, are we gonna have furniture there? So I think maybe building that out a little bit before it goes to council would be, I guess I'm going into comments, but I would be something I suggest because it helps clarify the, what both you and Director Cameron just mentioned. So, and how we've already are incorporating that feedback, even though we haven't necessarily gone out to the businesses yet. Okay, those are my questions / sorry, I went into comments. Do committee members have any other questions before we open to the public? No. All right, would any member of the public joining us virtually or in person like to provide comment on this item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or approach the lectern. We'll take in-person speakers first if there are any. Everyone will get 3 minutes. Okay, I am not seeing any in person. I see 3 virtual hands. So we will start, if staff's ready, we'll start with Bruce England. Is that okay?
Thank you, Chair. Bruce England, Wisman Station Drive, just 3 comments. One is, I think Chair Kamei, you just were saying this, but I kind of missed part of what you were saying about putting the furnishing in there. One of my comments is just in the mock-ups that there doesn't show the furniture, tables and stuff like that. And it would be helpful to see that so the full context can be seen as these things are reviewed. And the second of 3 comments is about my preference for the ribbon pattern, because it helps to emphasize the sort of random movement of people in that space. They're not just going to be going in straight lines. They're going to be meandering around. And I just like that visual cue for not only helping people know that that's allowed, but also for people who are maybe moving in straight lines to keep an eye out for people who are not moving in straight lines. And then lastly, during one of the recent rains, I noticed that some of the paint surfaces on the crosswalks were pretty slippery, as you often get in early rains. And so I did an Ask Mountain View on that. And I wanted to read you the quick response I got on that, but I have to navigate to it, from Brandon White. He says, conventional paint is more slippery than wet than other possible treatments. We are transitioning the city to thermoplastic pavement markings that last longer and have a higher friction coefficient. The California Street Project will upgrade all pavement markings to thermoplastic and address this issue. And he talks about the project timeline. So I just ask that you keep that in mind. In the staff report, it doesn't mention the safety angle, and that's really important. During dry weather, it doesn't matter, but when it's raining, keeping that in check would be a good thing. And maybe you can mention the safety angle on future staff reports, just so people who are decision makers can see that point and consider it in their decisions. That's it from me. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Celia Paymer.
Hi, I'm Celia Paymer. I am in the Varsity Park neighborhood. I also wanted to give my preference for the ribbons as someone who continues to advocate for bike access there, if that ever happens. I think the ribbons are a really nice way of slowing people down and not making it feel like a straight through commuter route. So I think that would be a good way to facilitate that, as well as Bruce said, the different pedestrians walking around each other. It just gives a looser feel. And then the other thing, I actually agree with the slipperiness. I was on California Ave in Palo Alto, and they have these beautiful, like, sort of glass mosaics in the ground, and that glass got super slippery when it was raining. So that was something I did notice on that treatment. So consideration for if some sort of like sand or medium could be added to the paint if it is something that would be slippery otherwise. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Jamil?
Hi, good evening. My name is Jamil Sheikh, and I am a resident of Old Mountain View neighborhood, and I represent Old Mountain View Neighborhood Association on the Downtown Committee. My concern was also the security, but which Bruce brought, and also just a thought. I was thinking about, I like the ribbon treatment, but how about if we make each block a different treatment? But when people come in, they know where they are, especially the guests who just come in first time or second time, they don't know. So a lot of time I notice that people looking for signs, our street signs are not very big either. They don't know where they are. But somebody can tell them, oh, just look for the treatment, right there, how they are, the design, and it may help. I just wanted to, just a thought, so I just wanted to put it out there. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, last call for public comment. All right. So I'll close public comment and bring the item back for committee responses to staff's questions, deliberations, and actions. And so we have two questions. Which central walkway treatment concept does the committee recommend? And does the committee have any feedback about the preferred concept? And the second question is, does the committee have any feedback on the colors or the medium recommended?
Yes, of course. So I want to follow up on the question of slipperiness. Do we have more information on like all four of these options with relative slipperiness, or can something like the ones that might be more slippery make them less slippery?
Yeah, just to jump in, many of these products have an additional aggregate that can be added to reduce slipperiness. So while I can't vouch for the individual slipperiness of one over the other, most of these material suppliers do have a process by which you can add some kind of ground material that they provide to the paint or application, so it is more grippy.
Great, thank you. Do you have more questions now? Have you gone back? Okay, so in terms of the two questions, I do like using the city's colors. I hear your comment about it going everywhere. But I think in the downtown, such a prominent location, and because we haven't put a ton of places yet, but we should watch that. I'm okay with this, using the city colors. I think they look really nice. And then, I must say, I'm kind of torn about the pattern. I really like the ribbon pattern. And at first I thought, oh, clearly it's the ribbon pattern. But the more I looked at it, the more I thought, well, now wait a minute. I do like when there's more coverage. And if you do what the VXC suggested and increase the width of the ribbons, are you going to still see the pattern? Will it still be as nice looking as they're not thin, but the thinner ribbons? I like the more coverage. And then I also thought, gosh, when I looked at it, the patterns that went right to the edge of the 16 feet seemed like they were inviting me to use the whole space. And would I feel constrained at all? Like I'm only supposed to be where the ribbons are instead of using the whole space. I also thought, somebody, even since we don't allow bicycles there, but people still ride there, are they going to try to follow the ribbons on their bike? So, I'm really torn on this. And then I thought, okay, if I put that just to the side, if the ribbons, touched the edges of the 16 feet and maybe had more, movement to them, not necessarily have them wider, but would that feel more like the other, patterns where it goes all the way to the edge, like you can use this whole space? And I don't know if that's possible, or would that also ruin the pattern? I guess that's probably a question. Would that ruin the pattern? If the ribbons went all the way to the edges at some points of the 16 feet? More than they did in the drawings?
Ramsey, did you have any input on that one? If the ribbons were curved?
Not necessarily, no. It would be, we'd have to experiment with it to see, you know, what's the aesthetic balance to strike, but there's absolutely a way to add more curvature to accentuate the edges.
Okay, because I do like the ribbons. I think they're very nice. I'm kind of intrigued by Jamil's comment about a different pattern on each block. I hadn't thought about that before, but I have been in cities where I have seen different patterns. Not necessarily on such a short area, but on a longer area, and some blocks might have nothing, but others have, it does have variety. So, I don't know, I'm kind of intrigued by that. I'm kind of wondering what your reaction to that comment is about maybe having 3. Did you guys consider that and then rule it out?
Can I say VAC did have a thought on that one, but when they came to recommending the concept, we said, you want that cohesiveness to go across the 3 blocks, continuity, so that each block doesn't look too different from other block. That did come up, and the VAC eventually recommended going with one concept across 3 blocks for cohesiveness, to add that continuity across the 3 blocks.
Okay,
That was feedback from VAC.
okay, thank you. So I guess my preference would be the ribbons, but hitting the edges of the 16 feet width and considering having them a little bit wider, because I do like the greater coverage, but not at the expense of a nice pattern.
Great, thank you. So I think you're basically saying what the Visual Arts Committee said, and also what I was going to say.
Okay.
More or less. I mean, I would say, let's see, I guess I'm attracted to the ribbons and the interlaced small most, but virtually everyone, you, public commenters, and Visual Arts Committee all said ribbons, so I'm put interlaced small aside. I do like more coverage than the ribbons show here, which I think is what Committee Member Matichak and the Visual Arts Committee also said. And I would like to see how that works out. I definitely don't like as little coverage as the 25%, which I guess is the hopscotch. That just looks like a road with a little bit of paint on it to me. And I go with the colors here. I just hope we don't brand ourselves like a piece of space stationery everywhere in the city. And then I think I'm kind of in agreement with what where both Bruce and Councilmember Kamei were going, or maybe this is my own comment, but it's similar, that seeing this in context would be helpful. And by context, I mean, like, some of these could look beautiful by themselves, but like a bunch of visual cacophony once you put out the chairs and tables and the fences and all the other things. And maybe I'd look at it in context and say, no, I'd like something more simple. So that would be helpful to me to see how it, although I'm not that scared of visual cacophony because it's pretty plain there right now. And then let's see, other comments. I think that the life cycle cost is probably the most important one. So I look forward to hearing that. And I agree with the comments on safety.
Thank you. All right, so, I think for myself, what I appreciate is the treatment criteria. I really appreciated how staff kind of walked us through that thought process. And then I think this slide on the application premise is very helpful. And I appreciate my committee members' comments, which is just, I think we just need to take it to the next step, which is I do think providing the was in here. I think the coverage and putting the percentage is really important. I agree. If we're going to be kind of doing this, we want something that's more than 25%. So having the different percentages there are helpful. I do, and the next step too is kind of giving more information about the treatment safety, a little bit more about the longevity costs, the permanency, that this may be, 10 years before we do anything different. I feel comfortable with the acrylic treatment because I do feel like with wear and tear, we were gonna want something where staff can, keep it up versus having to maybe have to go out to bid or RFP or every single time. I think we're, trying to minimize that. And I like the comments from the VAC and from committee members in terms of more coverage with the ribbon. And then finding a way to incorporate staff's feedback on the different placemaking that we will be making along each block is really important because I think that maybe when this comes to full council, we're gonna get a lot of comments from our business community and being able to have clearly stated why staff is kind of doing things or where we're gonna be putting the games or other items will be very helpful in terms of how the businesses, for them as much as possible, will be getting set up for success, right? And then as Dr. Cameron mentioned, businesses come and go, right? The longevity of a business can be 1 to 5 years sometimes, especially on Castro. So being able to have that flexibility, I think, which is what council gets comments on a lot, is like having flexibility. And then building in where the partitions are, the gate, the existing fences are, would be really helpful so that we know.
Yes.
Great. Yes.
I have one more question. When will the tables and games and things come back out on Castro?
As soon as the weather gets better, that's the next phase. We are gonna bring them back, but public seating is already out, the chairs and tables, public seating and the planters are already out, but we are waiting on the games, as you see.
There's additional chairs and tables to be brought out,
Yes.
but definitely the games. Yes, we need to get through the rainy season. They would be brought in every winter just to preserve them.
Yes.
But
I didn't see any chairs and tables.
There is, the first set came early couple of weeks ago and the next set arrived this
Ah,
week.
Okay.
There's some orange blue chairs back.
so just, we still have several more businesses with applications in process. You're gonna see more patio barriers going up, fences, and they're still working with the clients, businesses that would, in order to buy new furniture where they do need it. And then, but the plan is working closely with Community Services Department. When the weather turns, we're truly into spring, the rain's pretty much done and flowers are starting to bloom. You'll see all of the city furnishings come back out and you'll see all the flowers come back out. And by then we should have all our fences up as well as upgrading the barriers that we have at the intersections like we've been planning to do. So all of that we're doing over the next 2-3 months, taking advantage of the rainy season to get that work done. Kind of really looking forward to spring. It's really incredible.
Awesome.
And just to
And kind of to that point, I don't know when or where like the best vehicle to share that with the community or council is. But I think that would be great, and I think the community in particular would love to hear all of the improvements. And I know that when we put up like the flowers and other things, people commented to council how excited they were. So anything we can do to help highlight staff's hard work is something that I'm sure we're all interested in
Yes.
in sharing. And sorry, I realized I'm fine with the colors. Great.
I did comment on the treatment and I'm fine with staff's recommendation on this.
Yes.
Thank
I'm sure you have everything you wanted more from the committee.
Thank you.
Great. Anything else?
No.
All right, thank you so much, staff. So I don't think we need to.
Well, we were- We
or
did
would you like a
suggest that you
motion?
may want to make a recommendation to
So
council.
can I make a recommendation that we follow the, what Visual Arts Committee recommended, which is I forget the formal name of it, the ribbons, but with, more coverage up to 70% by expanding the ribbon widths. Is that basically what you said, or do you want to add some verbiage?
What we heard was the ribbons potentially wider to provide more coverage, but also looking at making sure they actually more fully cover the whole walkway by extending out, we can find a short way before that. And support for the city colors. Those, I mean, and then I think I would almost, well, I would almost take the rest as just comment to us because we said we would do more research into the costs and the life safety. And look at the slipperiness, so we'll more take that as comment as we finish refining what staff would recommend to use as a median.
Yeah, and I'm making that recommendation, but also I would like to see I want to see what it is. Maybe we'll look at it with more, the ribbons expanded and say, oh no, that looks terrible, since we've never seen it.
We'll see what we can do. Our hope was to kind of get to council in the spring so that we can get this out there as soon as possible after that. And you're not meeting again till May.
But when
So
you present it to council,
we'll look and see what we can do to,
is that something?
yes.
Is it Dale who generates that? Yes. Okay.
Updating it, yes.
Okay, so do you want us to raise, that's your motion or?
Yes, that's my motion.
Okay, I'll second it.
Great. Okay, so we have a motion from committee member Ed, seconded by Councilor Matashek. All in favor? All right, it's unanimous. Great. Wonderful. Thank you to staff. So that closes out item 5.1. We'll move on to 5.2, our citywide transportation and demand management ordinance update. Staff presentation will be provided by Ben Bucknell, transportation planner, and Diana Pancholi, principal planner. We also have our project consultants, Associate Julia Ween and Associate Gary Schiff for Steer Group, who will be able to answer questions. We'll start with our staff presentation.
Great. Good evening, CTC committee members. My name is Ben Pacho. I'm a transportation planner in the Public Works Department. I joined the city in January 2022 when I was brought on to help expand TDM function citywide. I want to briefly acknowledge Diana Pancholi, the city's principal planner, for her support on this project, as well as Gary Shui from Steer, who is an associate on the consultant team and joining us remotely tonight. Do you want to share? Oh, sure. And we're just going to share staff's presentation. And then the next slide. Great. So what is transportation demand management, or TDM? The 2030 general plan defines TDM as the use of strategies to reduce single occupancy vehicle trips and mitigate parking demand. As part of the planning and building permit process, the city requires developers to implement TDM for new projects so that future residents and employees will be incentivized to use alternative sustainable modes of transportation. The image on the right shows a number of TDM tools and options the city may require new development as conditions for project approval. By implementing these measures, new development help the city achieve important citywide goals, such as reducing traffic congestion, improving air quality and livability, as well as expanding mobility access across the city. For policy background, the basis for TDM in Mountain View was first established in the 2030 general plan, which subsequently informed the specific TDM provisions that are currently required in the city's precise plans. Additionally, City Council has identified developing a citywide TDM ordinance as a strategic priority in fiscal years 2023 to 2025. The goal really of the citywide ordinance is to build on the success of TDM in precise plan areas by extending its use citywide, where a more consistent, standardized approach would be more suitable to achieving the best results. Additionally, the ordinance will help create more transparency around how TDM requirements are applied to future projects citywide. Some of the benefits of the ordinance would entail lower commuting costs and improve multimodal access to new projects, which would result in higher tenant and worker satisfaction. While the ordinance will only apply to new development, the transportation team will offer and encourage existing sites to comply with provisions of the new citywide TDM ordinance. And delving into the project overview, key upcoming tasks include the ordinance framework, where we'll develop a TDM toolkit and key performance standards. We'll also prepare draft ordinance language that will be used to shape development conditions of approval. And to successfully implement the TDM framework, staff will consider ordinance management tools and solutions for monitoring and enforcement of TDM requirements and standards. And reviewing the project's work plan, we're currently wrapping up the vision and goal setting process as seen in the second share. As noted at the top, stakeholder engagement will continue throughout the length of the project, and staff will return to PPAC, EPC, and council for a study session later this year to review the draft recommended framework policies and performance standards, including proposed ordinance language. So in our work so far, the project team had sought to understand the depth and breadth of current TDM requirements through existing conditions analysis. A few of the key findings included here are variable chip reduction targets at the project level. As noted earlier, the basis for chip reduction targets was first established by the 2012 Greenhouse Gas Reduction Program as part of the general plan. Since 2012, such trip reduction targets have evolved to account for more recently approved projects and more innovative approaches to managing travel demand. Similarly, in our analysis, TDM programs and performance standards may vary from project to project, with some sites required to comply with peak hour trip caps, while some need only comply with trip reduction targets or percentages. And then finally on the right, the analysis identified a lack of standardization across TDM monitoring reports that are required by the city, including the structure of the reports themselves and its various elements. So to corroborate our existing conditions analysis, the project team sought to collect on-the-ground data from those closest in TDM practice. To that end, staff held 14 stakeholder interviews with a range of developers, including affordable market rate residential and commercial developers, major employers, local property managers, as well as staff from the City and Transportation Management Association, or TMA. Importantly, these stakeholder interviews provided key insights on existing challenges and opportunities with meeting the city's TDM requirements. Next slide. Key stakeholders also provided extensive feedback and input on their experience implementing TDM policies and programs. The main findings here are organized in the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and challenges matrix, or SWOX analysis. To share a few highlights, participants noted in strengths there on the top left, stem from a shared consensus and need for corporate investment in TDM, not just to meet project conditions of approval, but also to support employee retention and recruitment efforts. Areas of weakness on the top right involved a general lack of standardization of TDM performance requirements, including variable parking minimums and inconsistent application of required TDM measures and trip reduction targets. And moving to the bottom left, participants had identified opportunities to potentially pool resources across project sites that share common TDM plans. Such an effort could help projects more effectively reach scales of economy in TDM. And lastly, common themes around challenges on the bottom right touched on the capacity constraints for implementing TDM requirements, such that smaller to mid-sized businesses may not have the dedicated staff resources to manage and monitor TDM program activities. And more details about the SWOX analysis can be found in the attachment to staff's report. Next slide. And then following our existing conditions analysis and stakeholder interviews, we set about drafting a vision statement for the project. This involved reviewing TDM-related themes across key plans and policies adopted at the local, regional, and state levels. The keywords here indicate recurring themes across plans and policies, such as sustainability, equity, economy or economic vitality, connectivity, and mobility. As such, staff held a visioning workshop on September 11th, where participants were asked to craft a 1 to 2 vision statement that would help define the overall intent of the policy and more specifically what the TDM ordinance should respond to. The vision statement was based on existing conditions analysis and stakeholder input, whereby the transportation and demand management ordinance would seek to reduce single occupancy vehicle trips for new development and increase use of multimodal transportation alternatives that are sustainable, equitable, effective, and respond to changing demands. Slide. Participants at the vision workshop also articulated key goals, which would support the project in realizing its vision and overall policy objectives. The project goals span both operational focus goals and citywide mission-driven goals. In particular, the TDM project framework should prioritize setting predictable and effective requirements that should foreground equity and deliver sustainable travel options to reduce VMT and parking demand. And staff presented the vision and project goals of the TDM ordinance to the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee on Wednesday, October 25th, and to EPC on Wednesday, November 1st. BPAC and EPC members were generally supportive of the draft vision and goals and noted the importance of ensuring that TDM conditions ride or transfer between property owners as triggered by a change of ownership. Additionally, BPAC and EPC members suggested staff consider opportunities to incentivize and encourage existing projects to comply with the TDM ordinance framework. And there was also consensus among BPAC and EPC to prioritize developing measurable metrics and enforcement strategies, such that the outcomes of the ordinance better align and support its policy intentions. And so following tonight's Council Transportation Committee meeting and the input gathered, staff will finalize the project vision and goals. And in spring 2024, the project team will set about developing the draft TDM framework, making sure to benchmark our progress with neighboring jurisdictions. Staff will seek input on key framework elements and policies from stakeholders and the community this spring. And finally, adoption hearings of the TDM ordinance are tentatively scheduled in early 2025. Thanks. Moving on to CTC discussion questions. Staff looks forward to receiving your comments and input to help ensure the TDM ordinance best aligns with CTC's vision and hopes for the project. Next slide. So I'll leave the draft vision statement and project goals here for easy reference. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Does any member of the committee have questions?
Okay, so I guess I'll start with saying one of my questions was going to be about whether telecommuting and alternative work schedules were ever something you considered. So I was really happy to see that that's in the graphic, and I don't even have to ask. Were those added more recently, or because I know like before the pandemic, they probably were not a part of the TDM plan. So I'm just curious how they got there.
Right, so based on the TDM plans that are proposed by applicants, staff works with them to best help meet their trip reduction requirements. And telecommuting, hybrid work arrangements are an option that is available to applicants. And staff kind of works with them to understand what the level of effectiveness would be that would actually reduce trip reduction. So it is included as an option for them.
So has it always been included, or is it a relatively new thing?
It's been an available option,
see.
and yeah, as much
Maybe
as
used more now?
as much, yeah, as I've been doing the existing conditions analysis, I've kind of been seeing it kind of consistent across the conditions. So
It's been established for quite a long time, but
Okay, good to know.
it's at a different level now. And I think that it's at such a high level that we need to start thinking about it slightly differently.
And how would
Because-
that be?
For example, people might hire more people,
Right.
more employees within a building. So in terms of percentage reduction, that means something different now that we have such hybrid workplaces.
Yeah, and I've heard you all say that in the past, in past reports, but I've also been reading that the number of I don't know exactly how I read it, and I meant to look it up and come in with the statistic, but that the carbon footprint has gone down for for commuting in comparison to the number of employees, because people are not coming in every day. So in general, not in Mountain View in particular, I don't know what's going on here.
Well, that may be going on right now. If you're doing it as percentage of total employees, yes, per employee. But again, if you're now able to place more employees in a building as their home base
right.
than you otherwise would have, your overall carbon footprint may not be going down. Or for us, the number of trips per day headed to that building may not go
You may
down.
be there fewer hours, but
But you have
still.
more employees making trips,
Right.
so you're filling your building still, just with alternate days.
thank you, Councilmember Hicks. I forgot to say that from the outset. I just to add a little bit of color, what we've noticed with the North Bay Shore trip cap volume monitoring results is that we are seeing less employees commute to the
Right.
area. However, those that are driving are disproportionately using single occupancy
Right.
vehicles.
as
So-
opposed to the shuttles and other, yeah. But still, there are fewer cars.
Fewer cars,
At the moment.
we're well below our
Yeah.
gateway capacities. But
Okay, so another one that I'm curious about is parking cash out and how that works, because I could see that. So I'll tell you the problem I have with it, but maybe the problem I'm thinking of doesn't apply. And you can explain to me more how it functions. Because I know I know this would be for a business, but when I lived in the apartment at Park Place, if they had told me you don't need to pay for the parking underneath, I would have said, fine, pay me for that or reduce my rent, and I would have just parked on the street. Because that's what I did anyway. I never parked in the parking garage. I always parked on the street. It was more convenient. Nobody even told me I was wrong. So anyway, so my question is, it seems to me, I wonder what the data is. I wonder how it works and what the data is on how it works. Because it seems to me that in places where there's no street parking available, say the place I was just at last week in San Francisco, it would work great because I would either have to take mass transit or something. I wouldn't be able to get, if I worked at the place, I wouldn't be able to get the parking cash out. But if I worked here, I could just park on the street. And I'd get the cash and park on the street. So, and then if people park on the street, the street parking becomes, you know, here we look at the street parking, we say we can change this into a bike lane. Or we can plant trees, we can add a planting strip, or we can widen the sidewalk. If they become parking lots for everyone, then we can't do those alternative things. Our streets become parking lots. And I don't want to cash people out, give people cash so that they can turn our streets into parking lots. That's not meeting the objective that's stated here, which is, you know, I'd be driving anywhere, right? If I did that. So what do you do to make sure you're meeting that objective, that they're not just parking on this, getting the money and parking on the street?
So I can respond to this one. Hi, Rhea Hooch-Barrett Lowe, Transportation Manager. Thank you for the question. So typically parking cash out is not used for residential.
Yeah, no, I meant if
Developments.
we were if
Yeah,
that was a work.
So that would,
situation.
you would normally use unbundled parking for residential, parking cash out is more for commercial. It has been very effective at helping to shift modes within the Bay Area. But I think the spillover is always something that you need to consider. And so that's why it's important to pair, typically parking cash out is paired with things like a residential parking permit program, so that then you're addressing the spillover at the same time as offering this benefit of getting there by a different mode.
So I know it's only for working, and I'm sorry I confused it by talking about my living situation, but I'm really concerned about it. I'm concerned about things that people say are working in the Bay Area, because the Bay Area is I've lived in very different places in the Bay Area. San Francisco is really different than Mountain View, for example. And something that would work in San Francisco, because they have a lot of mass transit and they have it's very difficult to park on the street, might not work here. And I just want to make sure we're not using cookie cutter solutions that don't actually work, don't actually serve the purpose they're supposed to
So the
serve.
two specific examples I was thinking of when I said the Bay Area were Genentech in South San Francisco, which is a very kind of industrial area, industrial sort of suburbanish, and the second one is Stanford University, so the next city over.
Yeah, you can't ever find parking at Stanford. I mean, that's really different than downtown here, where I don't think it would work in the same way.
So the tools that we have, if we, you know, because we're gonna be facing this also with the fact that we've had to remove parking minimums for the downtown, and we'll be doing that in more areas. So whether you're doing a parking cash out as a way to encourage somebody to choose not to park, or just not parking available, we'll be continuing to look at the strategies you see in the downtown, where we might have 2-hour parking limits.
Yeah, that's what you would have to
Yeah,
compare it with.
you have to
Otherwise,
start-
it's not.
exactly.
It's just giving
Easily.
people money to park on the
Exactly,
street.
so.
It has to be enforced. Yeah. And it has to be enforced too, somebody to. Okay, so that was one question and concern that I have an ongoing concern about cookie cutter solutions that don't apply in our case. And then can you explain to me when you use peak hour trip caps and how that works?
Right.
As opposed to, you had another one, and I think I didn't write it down. Anyway.
So when applicants will submit their proposal, we'll assess transportation impacts and use established practice through, I believe, the ITE's guidebook, which gives us a sense of trips generated during the peak hour, and characterize that by land use, project size, and time of day. And what we mostly solve for in our conditions is the peak hour and versus the peak period, which we would do for North Bay Shore. So
I think that's what I'm trying to ask, the difference between peak hour and peak period and when you use each one. I'm
Right.
sorry, that is what I'm.
So for office development, we would assign a trip cap during the peak hour to ensure that there's enough capacity, roadway capacity at that time. And most of the mitigation is targeted towards, the 8 to 9 peak hour. That'll be spelled out in conditions. as well as an evening peak hour, the 4 or 5. Some project conditions may have a peak hour trip cap in the morning, depending on the land use, if it's maybe a hotel. Some might have both AM and PM peak hour trip caps. And some project conditions might just have % trip reduction versus a specific concrete trip cap. And that's kind of what goes to the variable performance standards that we've seen across conditions since we've been applying TDM requirements.
But that's been one of our challenges, as you mentioned, is that it seems to vary from project to project. There hasn't been a consistent, and one of the, correct me if I'm wrong, but what we're striving for is a more consistent approach to the new citywide TDM ordinance. And I would suggest that we also really have to explore what does make the most sense, because when you do a peak hour basis, one, you don't want to specify the actual hour. You want to know when the actual peak hour is, because it can change through time. You might be just encouraging people to come in an hour earlier, an hour later. You did not take that trip off the road. Because the big thing you were asking about what was available in the past, I remember 20 years ago and all of this, we were all about flex hours. We weren't about getting people out of their cars. We were about getting them not driving during the peak period when it was most congested. That's a different outcome, right? So we may need to look at measurements that are more focused on overall daily trips, because if the goal is we want to reduce the number of car trips, period. It's not
Well, so that
necessarily
brings,
congestion management.
yeah, so that's the other thing that's a little muddied in this, and I'm trying to form a question, whether we're solely trying to get single occupancy vehicles off the road, or whether we're looking mostly at congestion, or whether we're looking mostly at cutting the carbon footprint, in which case we might add some stuff on electric vehicles, enabling electric vehicles. If we say congestion is not a problem, maybe we want to do more to encourage electric vehicles. And I don't know how that fits in here. Is that something you ever think about in terms of TDM?
That is one of the
electric vehicles?
considerations. So I think the different metrics kind of speak to different things. So peak hour and peak period trip counts generally address the issue of roadway capacity constraints and traffic congestion. All day trip counts address the issue of VMT and sustainability impacts more broadly. And sometimes it also relates to greenhouse gas emissions. So that's where the EVs can come in terms of if that is the criteria.
And do you put those in TDMs or not? Is that
Provision to support electric vehicles. We have the code, I believe, the electrical code, which requires that, building new development will include charging infrastructure. But to the extent that TDM does,
you don't
not
put it?
so much.
It's a separate thing.
No, yeah, thank you.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you. Committee Member Matichak.
Yeah, I want to start by saying, there was a lot of information for this topic. And there was a lot of really great information. And I kept on, as I was going through this, thinking, I want to talk about this, I want to talk about that. And then I thought, well, wait a minute, they're only asking me to go on 2 things. Because there was so much in here. And I appreciate the conversation you just had, because as I was going through this, I kept on thinking, what are we trying to do here? And ultimately, I feel like we've shifted over time. We used to focus on peak trips to address, for example, the level of service at intersections. And that has changed to VMT. And I think reducing the number of vehicles in general, whether it be SOV or any other vehicle. So I'm going right into what I thought. Sorry, let me back up and ask my questions. But I just sort of, I was surprised at how much was in here, given the questions you were asking. And it's hard to not also focus on all these other things. So I was wondering if we have any data on the use of transit passes. And when I say use of transit passes, it's by the person who receives it, not by, say, the employer giving them to people and them not being used. I don't know if we have any data on that, or could we get data on that? Because given the pathetic state of public transit around here, I really wonder how many people are actually using them.
Thank you, Councilmember, for your question. That would be good data.
Mhm.
As of right now, we've conducted an inventory across the city of which projects would be technically required to provide transit passes. But we don't have things at the level of what I think you're asking, which is the utilization by the actual user. We do have data pertaining to the Mountain View Community Shuttle because we closely operate that. And so we know, the average daily user during the week and know that it's kind of been operating at past post-COVID ridership figures. That's kind of uncharacteristic to other transit agencies in the area, such as, VTA, I think it's between 25 to 35% utilization post-COVID or the COVID baseline. And then Caltrain, I think, is still at around 35%. But we do know that a lot of the large employers have kind of suspended the transit subsidies that they do provide, whether that be the Caltrain Go Pass, the institutional pass that employers purchase for each employee. Given that ridership has been volatile since they brought back employees, but that could be something we look at more closely in developing the framework, which is kind of how do we understand the mode change that's happening with TDM being implemented. It's really on a voluntary basis that they provide that information. Some of that's proprietary, especially for the larger employers. So getting that could be kind of a challenge, but that's something we could work with the TMA to field those kinds of questions.
So I feel like I need to add a few comments along the way here, because there's so many questions I have. But I'm interested in trying to get more data on that, because I feel like I want to understand the effectiveness of the different tools that we would potentially require or have on a list. Because if they're not effective, I don't want them to say, oh, we're going to do that. And then it might be cheaper for them to buy transit passes for everybody, but it has no impact on what we're trying to accomplish than any other method they might choose. So I think it's important to have that data. Even a guess, yes.
I really do appreciate that comment. And one of the things that we've talked about some is rethinking when we do have a TDM program requirement, can we focus more on the outcome we're after rather than the specific measures? Because especially when we're approving a development, we're setting conditions of approval. That development is going to be out there for decades and everything changes over time. So rather than mandating buying transit passes or mandating other specific TDM measures, can it be more, this is what you need to achieve. Here's a toolkit. You can select what you want to use. You can change it over time, but we're interested in those monitoring reports. We're interested in that outcome that you are achieving. What you're required to achieve.
Yep, I totally agree. Yep.
Principal planner, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, thank you, Dawn. I was going on the same lines. Just one more thing was, because we wanted to provide flexibility, that was a very big comment that we received through our surveys and our interactions with the stakeholders. We want to give them an opportunity when they do their annual reporting of how they're achieving the goal that we have set for them. Do they need to tweak their program? And we're not mandating that you go and do this, which we might have been doing in the past, but we want to stay away from that because we learned our lesson. Give them an opportunity to come back and say, this is not effective for us. We'll be trying this to achieve it. Yeah, so it's more about flexibility.
And the results
Yes.
than the tool.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
That's great.
Yes, okay. Let's see, you mentioned the ITE trip and parking generation handbooks. Are there any alternatives, or is that the only source for that information?
There's in Santa Clara County, we now have a VMT tool which is provided by VTA, but it was developed by VTA using something that San Jose had done a lot of work with that. So that is something for estimating the number of trips, which is applicable to this area, which might be helpful.
I don't know if the VMT tool estimates trips per se. We can look into that more. The one thing about the ITE, what is that? And it's updated regularly. It's based upon just regular surveys. And it usually forms your basis for this type of land use at this density. If you don't do any TDM measures, you don't take extra efforts, will typically generate this many car trips. So you start that with your determining the number of trips that if you're not going to do anything. And then you start to give credits back for the various TDM measures and other efforts that you take, or how the site might be designed, like if it's mixed use and can share parking and things like that. But that's what, and I invite the other engineers in the room to add more information if I'm missing anything, but that's its value, and it's constantly being updated by going out and doing counts.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's still a valid source. Okay, yeah, I did read about the VTA one in here, and I even wrote this down that they characterized a neighborhood type in the early 2000s, and they have North Bay Shore characterized as not what it is today.
Yes.
Or the vision that we have for it. Yeah, do they have plans to update?
We've been talking to them, that's the hope.
Okay,
That tool's been useful as part of our CEQA process in determining whether there could be a significant impact under VFT. Is using that tool.
okay. I think I've asked this before, but how are, I would call them ride hailing, they're not ride sharing, trips calculated or included or counted? Is that an SOV? Yes.
We do count them for North Bay Shore, Trevor monitoring, so there need to be, I believe, 3 riders for them to be counted as an HOV. As opposed to an SOV, so.
So we are looking at the number of people in
And
vehicle.
we're doing amateur observations.
Okay, and if there's one person, it's an SOV. I'm sorry, if there's one passenger,
There's 2
it's
people.
2 people, yes.
Can I
It's,
ask a related follow-up
no,
question? So,
We've gone off the rails.
so if I work in North Bay Shore and I take an Uber there, alone, you're counting it as single occupancy vehicle. Now, when that person drives out, what, you count that as another single occupancy vehicle trip? Okay. Okay, thank you.
and let's see. So, I would like existing development to be subject to a citywide TDM ordinance. And so I was trying to think, have we looked at other things that it could be tied to besides the permit for development, like business license?
Your face is behind you.
Have we looked at tying it to something else? Did you want to take Jennifer?
Sure. Thank you for the question again. We have been talking with our consultant team on, because that is a constant feedback we're receiving from all the committees and commissions. There's a legal aspect to it, and we need to dig deeper into that
Okay,
before we can come up with a option to enforce that on existing businesses. Permitting, new permits associated with new permits is definitely something that we can
new development
into further.
permits.
Yeah, like if you want to come in with an addition, a considerable addition, or a brand new development permit, for sure.
Mhm.
These are some of the things that we have been thinking about. But again, I think there's a bigger legal question there, which we need to see once we develop the toolkit. Then we want to see, okay, how are we going to implement it, enforce it, and who gets to get what kind of goals that we're trying to achieve. So we're definitely looking into that.
Okay.
But we do not have a specific answer as of yet. Because I think right now we're focusing on vision and goals and then diving deeper into the toolbox and how we're gonna.
Yes, and I told you I wanted to talk about all kinds of stuff because there's so much information in here.
Related to that one too. Yes, I'm sorry. Which is, I think this is a much less effective way of getting what you want, getting the results you want. But do some of our companies, particularly the larger tech companies, have their own greenhouse gas goals? And can that be a way of associating them with this? Less effective than being able to demand it from them, but be worth bringing up.
We can, but voluntary offers are always, it's not predictable.
Right.
And if we want to, treat everybody the same, we want to achieve our own goals to a certain degree, and also understanding how is our infrastructure actually going to work. If we can depend upon what somebody's offering, can be really tricky.
If I may mention that I know that this is a big topic and there's so much we can get into. We were hoping to bring it to you in pieces, which is why we're starting at the very high level of, do you agree this is the vision, what we're trying to achieve? These are the goals we're working towards, the predictability, effectiveness. And then we can take the next step and start to look at what the toolkit could look like, the metrics that would look like, and of course, the ordinance itself, which starts to tell you how we can apply it, and then we can peel away looking at what are the options now for existing businesses and large scale residential, whether it's an incentive program of some type versus a mandatory program, we don't know. But we do need to take this in pieces, and this is not the first time you're going to be here, right? You'll kind of bring it each step of the way.
Because on the
Yes.
schedule, it didn't mention
I-
another CTC meeting.
So
I felt
yeah, it was
compelled to
kind
get
of-
all my
sorry
questions about
that.
the big
Yeah,
topic
I think
now.
we're trying to keep each slide's, minimum words, but, as I said, there's stakeholder outreach, which also includes continue to visit the advisory committees and CTC as we
Okay.
develop, and we'll further refine
Okay.
that.
Okay.
Thanks for your question also. There was a bill passed by the California State Legislature. It's SB 253, which the Climate Corporate Data Accountability Act, which requires larger corporations to disclose their carbon emissions. I mean, there's a lot of guidance that still needs to be issued, but that could potentially be a mechanism for existing development to disclose whatever trips might be associated, or what emissions might be associated with trips. And to the extent that we use the carbon inventory as a way to measure reductions in VMT or chip reduction. So I'll just table that, but there's, yeah.
Thank you. So I also noticed it said that there have been no non-compliance penalties issued. And that kind of surprised me. And so maybe not today, but I do eventually want to know, why is that? Is it lack of reporting? I can think of lots of reasons it could be, but I'm interested in data on that.
I can respond to that. So we hired Ben in, what was that, January of 2022. So before that, they hadn't been monitoring. And so we wanted to start with letting people know, you have requirements, this is what they are. We want compliance. We're not necessarily interested in penalizing people. We want compliance. And since he's been approaching, we've had a dramatic increase in compliance with reporting. So we're making great progress, but we want it to be, we want to give people a chance to coming to compliance first.
Yes.
So, and then there's a grace period, and then, then we'll revisit it down the track.
But this is an example that the city started putting these requirements on developments before we had the resources to monitor and work with them for compliance. And it was by adding the position that Ben.
Ben's the key to this.
Yeah, that we were able to.
No pressure.
And then you talked about stakeholder input. And I noticed that there was one organization that isn't an employer So some of the folks I would imagine would be interested. Will there be others? It was MVCSP. Well, there was a presentation given to them. How about other community groups? Do they approach you or how does this work?
Certainly, we're going to do kind of a, thank you for your question. We're going to do a wider focus of community members and work with CDD to come up with a more robust community engagement plan that include, stakeholders and community groups beyond what we've contacted so far. I think this first round is really focused on those in TD practice with experience with implementing it. So now we're going to take a step back and try to get the perspectives of the end users and community members who would actually be kind of using on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. And I guess that's all my questions for now.
Great, thank you. I know that the consultant is with us tonight, and I don't know if you wanted to share anything as you've been hearing the questions and the discussion from the committee, but I wanted to offer that opportunity.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I've been following the discussion intensely. I think it's been a very interesting one, and I thank you for your input. I don't actually have anything to add at the moment, but still available for
I have a
questions.
question for you then.
Sure.
So I think as the city is looking at this, can you just name or help us understand the other jurisdictions that you've worked with on putting forward an ordinance? Maybe some of the key highlights in other communities. I think that would be really helpful in terms of, I didn't see that in the staff report, and I think that's a perspective that you can bring as the outside consultant into the discussion that could be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we work with kind of a variety of agencies and jurisdictions and nonprofits. So as well as, we monitor events and what other jurisdictions are doing quite closely. I think most recently we've been working with the city of Culver City down in Southern California, as well as with the city of Sacramento on their TDM ordinance. We also had previously worked on the city of Carlsbad's ordinance. But I think what's interesting is that we also, we help staff TMAs and help them run their operations. And so have kind of a view into implementation of what kinds of strategies are useful, what kinds of strategies do employers choose to use. We guide employers in helping to choose their strategies for the context. And I think maybe kind of a broad observation is that it's very, very context specific. I mean, some of the issues that were brought up today, totally understandable in terms of, trying to understand which strategies are most useful and most effective. And it does change a lot. I mean, for example, when we're talking about the residential, when we're talking about parking, parking cash out and spillover, I know, Ria already addressed that, but just, that's a great example, and it really depends on if there is on-street parking nearby. We think about things like the user experience, like how far is an employee willing to walk if they have to park offsite somewhere? How much parking is available? How much does it cost? Is there a permit program? So there's a lot of, that's just one of those examples, but for all of the other alternatives out there, the use of them varies widely, just depending on what that context is. For example, how close the Caltrain station is, or how frequent the bus service is, how convenient it is to use, is sometimes even very site specific. Like, is the bus stop just really hard to get to? You have to, maybe in some situations, there isn't even a sidewalk that gets to the bus stop for that specific business on that one corner of the street, or it takes 2 minutes to change a cycle, to change a traffic signal cycle. And so no one uses it because it's just too inconvenient. So just wanted to kind of add that flavor. I hope that was useful.
It is, and I think, something, I want to frame it as a question. So the other jurisdictions, do they also, I feel like Mountain View, we're a pretty proactive city. And so we have, we also have our shuttle program. We have a variety of programs. And so I think part of the thing I was thinking about as my fellow committee members were asking questions was like, how do you create the ordinance while also thinking about the programs that the city has or supports while you're creating the ordinance? And I don't know if you've faced that intersection, but that's a question that's in my mind. I'm trying to understand, is that, okay, we adopt the ordinance and then they talk about the programs later, or how do they maybe fit?
Absolutely. From my perspective, I think that when we're considering the different kinds of project types, the different kinds of requirements that are put on projects, we are thinking about other options hand in hand. So kind of more programmatic options, for example. So I think they are very closely related, because things that you might not be able to do through the ordinance might be supported in other ways. And so those are things that we are thinking about.
And if I may add to that, thank you, Principal Planner Diana Panchoy. Just like any other ordinance, we have been working on in the past, we will have a rollout strategy for a lot of our ordinances. We have grandfathered in clause. I'm not saying that's definitely what we would like to have in this one, but I'm just giving an example of, kind of strategies that we've been thinking about in the past. Similarly, we'll have it in this one as well. The other thing that staff does is, and this is more from while the projects are still in an entitlement phase, we start telling people, we're already working on this. Refer to all these meetings where council and other commissions have given us direction. This is coming up. This is the tentative date we are targeting. So start thinking about it right now and start including that as part of your draft proposals and projects. So that will be another way that we'll be preparing people to kind of adopt to what's coming up. Because at some point of time, we'll have more concrete direction from council. We'll bring the toolbox and stuff. So it will be rolled out in that fashion.
Thank you. And then one final question is, as committee members mentioned, there's kind of a lot here. So is this, I know that tonight we're only talking about the ordinance. I know that there's going to be phasing and a variety of different things on the horizon. Is there a way to share that with the committee or the council? I mean, I'm just wondering how we can kind of continue that conversation, because I think some different questions that committee members brought up are worth learning more about or hearing about, and I'm just trying to figure out when we can talk about that. Or I
Thank you for your question. Certainly, we have a project website that will be a living webpage where you can kind of access in real time the subsequent steps of the project and where we are as far as maybe more community engagement that's planned, and other ways to kind of understand the various parts that we'll be tweezing out in the framework. So, for example, who will it apply to? How will we flesh out the TDM performance standards, the TDM toolkit? How will that be framed? And then some of the ordinance management solutions and strategies that will support implementation and enforcement. So those are big chunks of the framework that we want to, telegraph widely to the community, and that will, I think, the webpage will be most, the location. Certainly.
We can also send updates through the council connections, because we'll be having outreach to community engagement. We'll be going back to EPC and BPAC and then back to either CTC or council or both.
And I guess to connect the dots of my thought process, so we have, you noted earlier, I think in the presentation, we have a general plan, we have precise plans. We have this, greenhouse gas reduction program. Council adopts these documents. We're going to adopt the ordinance, but perhaps as, one of the things we're talking about is the flexibility, or how there's kind of instances where there's challenges, we're not really meeting the goals that we had originally intended because that's not the metric anymore, maybe it's legislation coming from the state. So I think what I'm trying to understand is we're gonna adopt this, we have our other documents. How do we keep what we're adopting evergreen, or how do we know that the goal, as I think Committee Member Matachek mentioned, or I think Committee Member Hicks, we're actually meeting that, you know? And I'm not sure if that comes to CTC. I don't know if that just comes in an update. I'm just trying to understand, because we're in a shifting environment, right? What the best venue is to talk about it, or to make sure that we're meeting those needs, you know, coming through community development as well, because it doesn't make sense. I think, as one of the examples was mentioned, if we're mandating that transit passes, but we don't know if people are using them.
The transit.
Yeah, you know, so I think that's the follow-up that I'm trying to understand. So, you know, happy to go into our comments on the ordinance, but how do we connect the dots to make sure we're actually being
On the
effective?
evaluation.
Yeah, or as you mentioned, Ms. Lowe, sometimes we don't have a residential parking permit program. It is my goal and hope that when I'm done on council, that we'll have something implemented in the community. We don't have that yet. So I think, are there the missing pieces too that council needs to adopt too? So I just don't know at what point we'll be able to have that discussion, since we're, you know, focused tonight just on the ordinance. Perhaps that's just a later thing, yes.
Thank you for your question. I'll take a first stab and then I'll pass it off. Right, there's so many different components to it, and to make sure that I think what we've discussed is a level of flexibility and maintaining that throughout the process. So understanding where the requirements will live will certainly be a substantive question we'll discuss in the study session when we tease apart the framework more closely. So this would be the next time we come before you and propose kind of the ordinance structure and the various subcomponents and get your thoughts and inputs on that. And then this is kind of where Gary and Steer will come in, talk about best practices and benchmarking some of what they've done in other jurisdictions and ordinance development, and really understanding where requirements have lived, whether it's in code or, you know, in different statutory places, just so that it doesn't require that it's a living document. So I think that's kind of what I would contribute.
Okay, we have talked about, you know, once the ordinance is citywide ordinance development, then we go back to the baseline plans and might do some very simple amendments to the precise plans so that it's consistent. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other questions from committee members?
Just one question that I got to ask, who is on the board? It's the MTMA board. Who's on that?
So, the Mountain View Transportation Management Association is a nonprofit organization member base. So they have, actual bylaws and governance that, right now, it's basically every TMA member is currently on the board. And that includes Mountain View. We are a member, so we have one seat on the board. But they do have a process that when their membership gets much larger than it is, in order to keep their board down to, it's about 12 or so. Then they'll evolve into where there's certain key permanent members, usually it's the founding members and the biggest employers. But then the rest of the members will select a representative. They have different ways to group it to keep the board smaller and manageable, but then having an all-member meeting, you know, at least once a year. But right now, the board is the current members of the TMA.
Okay, thank you. I couldn't quite visualize this, so thanks.
Great, all right. We'll now open it for public comment. Would any member of the public joining us virtually or in person like to provide comment on this item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or approach the lectern. We'll take in-person speakers first if there are any, and each speaker will receive 3 minutes. I'm not seeing any in person, but I do see virtual. So we'll start with Emil Abraham.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, so I'm Emil. I'm on Middlefield. So I'm very excited to see a reduction in VMT, which is like vehicle miles traveled, as an explicit project goal in our TDM. I think it's a fantastic metric to track, just like the BPAC suggested. We should make sure that our goals are data driven. And in fact, we're not the only ones, just like other staff members mentioned. VTA is also looking at this. I recently attended a public outreach session held by VTA for their 2050 Valley Transportation Plan, and reduction of VMT is also one of their explicit goals. So I think having our goals aligned with VTA is a huge opportunity to collaborate with them in many different ways, maybe securing more funding. We might have an easier time with that. Working together on like traffic signal prioritization for buses or our shuttle. Maybe working together on any other type of transit-oriented development projects. So I highly encourage that our staff and everyone reaches out to them to coordinate for future projects, and especially since our goals are aligned. I think it's a great chance to show that Mountain View can be at the forefront of greener and a more equitable future. Thank you.
Thank you. James Kuzma.
Good evening. It's James Kuzma, just speaking for myself tonight. Firstly, I guess it's always good to say that this is a wonderful project so far from what I've seen. I just wanted to call out at least a couple of things that I heard in the discussion earlier. One was I didn't hear what exact figures got cited, but it sounded like there's some uncertainty about where ridership is at relative to pre-pandemic. Per the Caltrain board meeting agenda for the day after tomorrow, VTA is at a bit over 80% for the past few months relative to pre-pandemic ridership. Caltrain is at 35% and has been hovering around there for a few months. The other thing along that line is I heard a couple comments about mass transit not being outstanding around here, and while there are definite improvements we need, it is nonetheless usable for a great many trips, as I can attest to. I mean, this Thursday will be the fastest and most convenient way for me to go meet a friend for dinner in Redwood City. And later this year, Caltrain will start running electric trains, which make local trips to San Francisco a bit over 20 minutes faster. So there are imperfections with the system, but a lot of TDM is about moving marginal trips from one mode to another, and there's a lot of marginal trips that could move to mass transit or walking and biking in the city. And the other thing I was going to mention was touching on some concerns about like basically getting to what was alluded to a few times about parking permit programs. That those are, as I believe a staff member noted, but I'm not sure if it was Transportation Manager Lowe or Director Cameron, that is one of the ways that various localities will address simultaneously doing parking cash out or the such, to have permit programs so that people don't use up street space. That is also a way to address some of Councilmember Matichek's mentions about how do we make so that existing developments also are reducing their vehicle mile traveled. Because if there's less street parking by those developments, then fewer people will drive to those developments. But along those same lines, I want to be careful about saying we should tie too much to the TDM directly. As was mentioned, the TDM program will impact how some buildings are built that will be around 30, 40, 50, 100 years from now. And as we all know from our housing element process, a lot of buildings are going to be built in the next 8 years in Mountain View. And so the sooner we can get a TDM program over the line to ensure that buildings are built sustainably, the better we will be. And I don't want to say kick the can down the road for everything else, but I have full confidence that we will be able to tackle the problems and challenges that arise. Thank you.
Thank you. April Webster.
Hi, April Webster. I want to start with saying I think it's wonderful that you're talking about your different goals and potential metrics to look at to evaluate and monitor. One comment I'd like to talk, one thing I'd like to address about it is the focus on performance and VMT. And I think VMT is a wonderful number, but it's very myopic in that the TDM is supposed to understand how people make their decisions about transportation and influence and encourage them to change their behavior. And if you're focusing only on performance, that's really looking at one type of trip for the most part, and that's commuting. It also doesn't, I've heard people speak about usability and user experience, but you can't evaluate that just using VMT, just performance. And I know in the Bay Area and the tech industry, we're very performance, pro-performance, but there are other metrics that you can use to look at usability and the experience of it, and dig a little bit deeper to get at what enhances the experience, some of these softer metrics. And I think this is really important. And where the industry is starting to move, you'll hear people talking about experience, the enjoyment, the joy of riding, and you need that really to see a wider population of people biking and making that shift. Because if they don't enjoy it, they're not going to do it. It's what you would experience in other industries as well. If you don't enjoy the experience of using, say, a Mac versus a Linux or something like that, the experience isn't good, you're not going to make this shift. One other comment on equity and inclusivity. And I've been seeing this in the industry. It's quite widespread, but the way this is done, it often does not collect demographic data. And I used my first career as a statistician. And if you don't collect demographic data, you cannot evaluate whether your survey, your outreach is a representative sample of your population. And you can make no real conclusions then about whether it's the design that you create is going to satisfy all the needs of the people in your community. And we've seen how this has been a problem with AI. The data they used was incredibly biased, white men. And so they weren't able to do prediction and really use that data because it's biased. And so if you really want to tackle inclusivity and equity, you need to start collecting this data when you're doing outreach. And we're pushing, this is getting pushed more at the regional level and state level, but I think it's also important at the local level and maybe to set an example for other locales. Oakland's done something in their ATP if you want. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, that concludes public comment. Not seeing any more hands. So I'll bring the item back for the committee for responses to staff's question. I believe there are 2. And deliberation and action. Any committee member like to pick up first step?
I'll go first. First, I want to thank staff. This was a very information rich, both the staff report, the presentation, and the answers to the questions. It's a fascinating topic and one that I think we all want to get right. So I think some of us could talk about it all night, and so it's really good to hear there'll be opportunities. So I'm going to, so I have my comment on the vision statement is that it all looks good, except that I find myself not knowing exactly what multimodal transportation means. Does that include virtual travel? Or is virtual a separate thing? If I zoom in, am I using a different mode or is that not included?
We can probably flesh this out a little bit. Do you have
because if it's not included, I would say in the vision statement, I would say increased use of multimodal and virtual transportation alternatives or something along those lines. I would add that if it's not, but if it's seen as a part of multimodal, then you would need to add it. So that's on the, let's see, the question is on the vision statement. and and the goals. Yeah. So, and then in terms of goals, the goals all look good to me. I can't, who would disagree with predictability, effectiveness, sustainability, and equity? I think that the discussion tonight has kind of focused on effectiveness, really making sure that I liked a lot of the answers, a lot of the questions and a lot of the answers around that. And that's something I'd like to continue focusing on, whether what we're doing is effective, because that's really the important thing. And then the other part of question number 2 is other feedback. So my other feedback is that I really liked what, I think maybe it was Diana, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, who said it, focusing, or maybe it was Dawn, I don't remember anymore, but focusing on mandating outcomes from a toolkit, not on mandating certain tools. I really liked that's in line with being effective. I really like that concept. And I think several of the things that we brought up are a part of that, how to make cash out effective as opposed to just being paid to park on the street. And making sure that transit passes are an effective tool, how effective. And I like the comments on demographics as well. And those are all my comments.
Great, thank you. Committeeman Matachek.
Thank you.
Okay, great. This is my 3rd committee meeting of the day, so bear with me. Let's see, so the draft vision statement, I liked it, but I would take out for new development.
You're all editing what I would
Um,
do. That's perfect.
Because I want this to apply citywide to everything. Well, almost everything. More than just new development, let me put it that way. So I would take that out. The goals, I agree, I think these are good ones. Certainly when I looked at this, I thought, the benefits are, in my mind, sort of the metrics that we would then be measuring. And I totally agree that what we should be doing is focusing on the outcome and not necessarily how they get there. I also want to make sure that say if it's citywide, it goes with the land. I was kind of disappointed to read that it doesn't. I guess I thought it did, all these ones that we've approved. I thought it was
Well,
land.
They're
Some have.
conditions of development, the condition of approval for the development. So they stay with the development while it's there. But if the property owner wants to come in the future and tear down and build a new development, then they'll get new conditions of approval.
Well, that would make
At that
sense.
time.
Yes,
So it
stays, so are you saying currently it stays with the development?
exactly.
Okay. So I guess the distinction is stay with the development versus stay with the land. And
It's kind of the same thing then, because
Kinda is.
the development
Yes.
is permit for the use of that land. So
yes, and if you have a different development, you might have a different goal for it because it could be a different use or a different scale. Okay.
But it also seems to give you the opportunity to update it if conditions have changed.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. And is there anything else? Certainly we want this to be effective. So I really appreciate as I said before, all this additional information and discussion. Because I think they're definitely improving this versus what we've done in the past. And I think that's the Mountain View way. We're out there at the beginning and we refine it over time. See. And that's it. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'm really excited that we're moving forward with an ordinance and that we have the funded position. We're able to kind of take all the things that we worked on as a council and aggregate it and see what's working and what's not working and do this whole SWOT analysis. It was great. Because I think we want to be as effective as possible. So in terms of the vision statement, I agree with the tweaks that my committee members have made. I think it really shows the direction that the city is going into, which is it's not just for new development, it's for all. I think we've had so many conversations about being a walkable, bikeable community where there's good flow, where we're trying to create more, connections between green spaces and other things. So I think that makes sense. And increase of multimodal, virtual transportation options. I think, increased use of, I don't know if it's also like mode shift, right? I think a lot of it is California car centric and creating the opportunities for mode shift. So I'd be comfortable with that word as well. For question 2 about the goals of the other feedback, I appreciate how they're grouped. I think the only one I struggled with was equity, because I didn't feel like I had enough information to determine how we're measuring that equity. And I know in the transit space, I know Lucy in particular has been kind of trying to spearhead, kind of getting more demographics, trying to understand the kind of usage. But I struggle because, one of it says expand access to affordable and reliable transportation options for all who live and work in Mountain View. But I know, for example, VTA is not, is shutting down or rerouting some of their routes, which many people use as their, daily commuting or to get places. And I think that's where we have stepped up with our community shuttle. And I see high usage in my neighborhood of people using that because they're not seeing that option from public transit. And so, I don't know if it's equity or if it's like access, and we're trying to build the equity in the access. But it's also difficult for me as we are hearing about bills trying to aggregate all of the transportation agencies, or we're hearing about potential price increases at the fare box, right? So, and that's not something necessarily that the city has control over, right? So I just struggled with that bullet just because I think there's the layer of the public transportation option, but also what the city is trying to do with our TMA partners, right? And providing that. So I feel like that could use a little bit of tweaking or a little bit more thought there, because it's not just totally within our control on the access and then the reliability, right? Has been a struggle. So that's my comments there. And then any other feedback kind of to my questions earlier, I think that this is something of interest to probably the entire council, which is, not only the ordinance, but the programmatic elements. And I think that, yes, the outcomes are what are important to us. And so if we're doing things that are antiquated or where the industry is not going anymore because of, coming out of this very long pandemic, where we still have a lot of question marks, I think, and we're going to be talking about one of those as our next item. I think if we need to make pivots, making sure that we have the opportunity for council to be able to be nimble with staff to meet those needs, is something. A feedback. Great. All right. Anything else?
Yes, actually, one of the things you said made me think about something. I agree that we didn't spend very much time talking about equity, and maybe that's because there are other times to talk about it. But I also did like what one of the public speakers said about collecting demographic data, because that might tell us if there are particular demographic groups that this isn't working for. For example, maybe parents who have to link going to childcare with going to work, or maybe lower income people who are essential workers and, I don't know, have to bring tools with them, or, those are only 2 examples, but maybe more demographic data, we can see whether somebody's being shorted. There's something we should do.
Or, for our rising senior population, are they getting kind of what they need? Seeing that. Great, all right.
This is great feedback. Yeah, wonderful.
Great, thank you very much. Yes. Topic of interest. So we'll move on to item 3. Thank you very much to staff. The Shoreline Boulevard Interim Bus Lane and Utility Improvements, Project 16-58, Scope Phasing Options. Staff presentation will be provided by Ed Arango, Assistant Public Works Director. Oh, and we have Robert. And Robert Gonzalez,
yeah,
our
it's
Principal Civil Engineer.
many of us here. Give us a second to get set up here. Okay. Okay, thank you, Chair, committee members. Ed Arango, Assistant Public Works Director and City Engineer. And we're here in front of you tonight to discuss the potential scope phasing for the Shoreline Interbus Lane Utility Improvements Project. For background, this project was identified as part of the as a priority transportation improvement in the North Bay Shore Precise Plan to accommodate the growth anticipated in the North Bay Shore area. As part of the Precise Plan, the strategy is to support mode shift without adding vehicle capacity, done by reducing single occupant vehicle travel and implementing infrastructure improvements to encourage higher commute modes for bicycle, pedestrian, and transit users. As a result, the Shoreline Boulevard corridor was identified to have several focused improvements, including protected bike lanes, wider sidewalks, a median bus lane, and a bicycle pedestrian bridge over 101. Prior to March of 2020, Shoreline Boulevard was very congested, as we can all remember, with substantial delays during the peak morning and evening commutes. At that time, Caltrain ridership was extremely high, including connecting MVGO and corporate shuttles. VTA also ran a bus route through the North Bay Shore area, which they continue to do. And staff estimated that during the peak hour, about 20 buses per hour would use the median bus lane. So this diagram shows the project elements and the limits of the project, which begin from Middlefield Road and they go to Pear Avenue. When the project was initiated, the scope included both active transportation and utility improvements. Specifically, traffic signal modifications, upgraded utility lines, a median bus lane, bike lanes, and protected intersections. As previously mentioned, another corridor improvement along Shoreline Boulevard is the bicycle and pedestrian overcrossing project at the Shoreline and US 101 intersection. This bridge, highlighted here in the yellow box, would provide connectivity for bicycles and pedestrians with a dedicated walkway for pedestrians and a two-way cycle track for bicycles, as shown in the cross-section on the right. Since 2020, the context of the area and traffic movements have substantially changed, including roadway usage. As seen in this chart of the gateway monitoring history, traffic volumes have been increasing since 2021, but are currently lower than expected, being approximately 70% of pre-COVID levels. We're seeing reduced ridership across multiple areas. Caltrain ridership is approximately 35 to 40% compared to pre-pandemic levels, which has also reduced ridership for connecting MVGO and corporate shuttles. In discussions with VTA, they've indicated that they may not initially use the bus lane due to minimal time savings and potentially creating confusion for customers at the bus stops. And as currently designed, the bus lanes don't allow access from the US 101 on and off ramps at Shoreline Boulevard. And due to this, some employers have indicated the bus lane may have lower anticipated usage. Lastly, within the past year, development plan for the North Bay Shore has been delayed as a result of the economic conditions and continued flexible remote work schedules, including several employers reducing their staff levels. In response to these changing conditions, staff is proposing a three-phase approach to the bus lane project. Phase 1 would be focused on the bicycle, pedestrian, and utility improvements. As seen in this typical cross-section for Shoreline Boulevard, the sidewalk and bike lane improvements would still be constructed, but the median bus lane component would be deferred to a future phase. The second phase would include a feasibility study of interim bicycle improvements through the US 101 interchange from Tarabella Avenue to La Avenida or Pear Avenue. An element that would be studied is the feasibility and construction, if supported by council, of a two-way medium bike path along this section to facilitate a lower stress bicycle facility that may avoid conflicts with the freeway on and off ramps. Finally, when conditions support a need for a medium bus lane, the construction of the bus lane component would move forward. This phase would run parallel to the construction of the bridge overcrossing project to replace the interim medium bicycle lane constructed in phase 2. Staff would also evaluate design modifications to the bus lane to allow shuttle access from the US 101 on and off ramps at Shoreline Boulevard, as well as meet with VTA and coordinate transit lane educational and operational needs. So moving on to funding and costs, as noted in the memo, design funding is fully committed, but construction funding is available and funded from several sources, mostly restricted uses, that fall into 4 main categories: shoreline funds, developer contribution, CIP reserve, and utility funds. Currently, the project's at 95% design with an estimated construction cost of $23 million. A detailed analysis of the cost savings for deferring the median bus lane elements hasn't been performed, but staff expects the savings to be approximately $1.2 to $1.5 million, which can help cover some of the escalated costs for the project. Finally, for next steps, after receiving feedback from the committee tonight, staff expects to take the phasing approach option to council in early 24. That brings us to the 2 committee questions. Question 1 is, does the committee recommend deferring the median bus lane elements and phasing the project? And question number 2, are there other phasing options the committee would like staff to explore? That concludes the presentation.
Great, thank you. Does any member of the committee have any questions? Committee member Hicks?
I do, but I'm just sorting through this, answered some of my questions on this presentation.
Explain to me a little more how the I forget what you called it, the bus lane, the median bus lane, how you'd get up. So I'm bicycling down, it's gonna, one option is to have it interim bike lanes there. How I'm biking down Shoreline from wherever, from downtown. And I'm in a regular bike lane. How does that work? How do I get on it and off it? I'm having trouble visualizing all of it.
Sure. So you would really access it at the signalized intersections. So for example, if you're coming from downtown Mountain View and you're going up Shoreline.
From up here.
Yes. You're going up Shoreline. Once you get to the Tarabella intersection, that's a signalized controlled intersection.
I see.
So we expect that the bicyclists would wait at the northeast corner, cross Tarabella, wait at the northeast corner, and then once they get the green, they're an ability to cross, but they wouldn't do the full cross. They would enter into the interim bike lane in the median. We're still coordinating the specifics. You know, we haven't figured it all out yet, but it's a concept that we wanted to, we thought could be feasible, but a feasibility study wouldn't even be needed because it's in both directions. We'd have to figure out how we would get bicyclists out of either the medium bike lane at La Avenida or at Pear.
I see. So you're still choosing some on and off points.
Correct. Yeah, there's definitely entry and exit points. And then in between there are intersections. So we'd have to evaluate making sure that it's green and it's green for the bikes and it's safe.
So it may entail some differences some changes in signalization. Is that what?
It may
What you're
not,
thinking
not major differences in signalization. I think, it's a bike call that we would want to include.
Like call?
Yeah, so, at every signalized intersection, there are, the vehicle calls, which is automated. Either there's sensors on the ground that sensors a vehicle there, and the traffic control cabinet, there's a computer that says, oh, I sense a car is there. Or when you push the button to cross the street as a pedestrian, that's a call.
Okay.
And so equally.
I've never heard that term.
There's it may basically be a push button or some kind of activation for bicyclists to activate that they're there and they need to get out of the bike lane and into the signalized intersection rather than waiting for a cycle. They can call it and then that way it knows. So it'd be minimal. It wouldn't be full signalized changes, but it'd be some changes that we would need to implement with the signal.
And then do you envision, I haven't looked at it that carefully, do you envision multiple places? So again, I'm riding my bike down there that I can get on and off, or is it just kind of to get me over the freeway, which I have done that and it's not pleasant, biking by the freeway entrances and exits. So is it just to get me over that pretty much? And then I go to the side bike
Correct.
lane so
Yeah.
that I can, so
It's-
there's not constant entering and exiting at different intersections.
And it's the on and off ramp conflicts that we're really trying to focus on. That's where
nice.
it's very congested and we're coming on and off the freeway. And
Right.
those are free turn onto the freeway. And then, so there's no, it's this weave between the cars and the bicyclists.
And so then there would be no bike lanes? Would there still be a bike lane like the one that's there now where I can cross the freeway and maybe get killed while I'm going to a concert? Or will that not be there anymore?
So they think that'd be part of the feasibility analysis.
I see.
You know, we haven't got into the details and that's, we get a consultant on board, kind of evaluate, how do we want this portion of shoreline to look? Is it feasible? What improvements would we need? Do we want to include both bike lanes along the side of shoreline as well in the median?
And then my next question is, will it be available to pedestrians? Because actually I walk there more than I bike. So would it be available to pedestrians or do pedestrians still get to run across the freeway as they're
And so I
walking
think
down there?
that's part of the analysis of, so the median bus lane, we have carved out approximately 12 feet of kind of curb to curb interior to use for, so we can use that for two-way bike lane. We would have to evaluate the feasibility of making this sort of a class 1, is this something that we could do? And we, again, hire a consultant to can identify the feasibility of, can we turn this into a class 1 kind of pathway that's mixed use?
Okay, so those things are still, those are the feasibility things. Okay, I understand much better. Thank you. And so question number 2 is, are there other phasing options? I imagine when you ask that you might have some in your minds. So, because you've been thinking about this longer than we have, are there other, it seems like things are really in flux in terms of land use, in terms of mass transit use, and then also there's now possibly AVs, automatic vehicles, maybe that in the, an automatic AV, we've gotten letters from Waymo just recently, maybe you have too, enabling them. And I know that in San Francisco, when they were rolled out, that kind of changes the transportation mix also. And I won't say more about that, but many things are changing. So do you have other scenarios that you're thinking about? Like maybe we don't need the bus lane and we should just do better bike and pedestrian stuff, or maybe we use that lane for, I don't know, a carpool lane or electric vehicle. And do you have, have you been mulling other things before we take a stab at other phasing? Since you're the expert.
So, let me just see if I can take this in a more systematic approach. Staff is definitely recommending that phase 1 be to do the utility projects, because those were needed to upsize water and sewer meetings for our city. And they're very aging and they need to be replaced. And the reason we combine utility projects with street projects is if you're digging up, do the underground first, then build on top. So that really needs to get done, and that's a big part of that construction cost is the utility work. We also, acquired property and did a lot of work to get ready to put in these protected bikeways and better sidewalks. So we're saying for phase one, we want to finish these improvements and get them done. The idea of a phase two of having a place for bicyclists to get over the interchange area, especially since the bike ped bridge we envision will be delayed for quite a while. Just seemed to make some sense, but it's not, we don't have to pursue that. That's part of what we were putting out as a, question mark in terms of, do you want to do this? Do you want this incorporated in the phasing? We thought about, can we get that into the first phase? But the problem is that will send us back to redesign right away. We haven't done the feasibility study. And frankly, the longer we sit on getting these utility improvements done and the bike improvements, just the more expensive they get. As you know, we previously started construction, we pulled it back. We need to get it done. It's just getting more expensive. In terms of the transit lane, we are recommending that at this time, not making dramatic decisions to change the project at this stage for a couple reasons. One is, we still don't know what the future is going to be, and we could find 5-10 years from now, Shoreline Boulevard is as bad as it was pre-COVID, that, cars are stuck in stop and go, and we may be back to a point where as part of an overall transit system, especially as transit evolves, we may want that bus lane after all. But at the same time, by pausing and waiting to install it, we get time to see how things develop, and over time, as council could decide, okay, we've had enough time, things have shifted enough. We might want to consider approaching this in a different way. The other piece to keep in mind is we have the North Bay Shore Precise Plan. We have its EIR, we have its mitigation requirements. We're still planning on that growth to happen. It just may take longer than we thought it would originally. And this is one of the priority transportation improvements. So again, we'd recommend that any decision about not pursuing the bus lane permanently be made in the greater context over time of re-looking at all the circulation needs of North Bay Shore.
Okay, I think those are my questions.
Committee Member Mata.
Thank you. So on page 3 of the staff report, it talks about the right-of-way acquisition. And it says we've completed purchase of 9 parcels.
Portions of parcels, yeah.
Sorry, yes. And is that all? Like, is it 9 of 12 or 9 of 9 or?
No, it's all of them.
It's all of them. Okay, okay. And I was curious if this has been run by the BPAC yet?
We haven't run this by the BPAC yet.
Okay.
We wanted to have a kind of a larger context discussion with the CTC before we get into any of the details of the specifics. It is a strategy approach.
Okay. I guess, here I am kind of interested in a comparison of the cost and timing and, will it ever happen? The bridge, bike ped bridge that's separate from Shoreline versus doing an interim bike. I certainly like the bike ped bridge that's separate. But is it that much more expensive or that much more uncertain? Like, what would prevent it from going forward besides having money? Or is that the major thing?
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
All right, well, one, it's definitely gonna be a lot more expensive than this interim, but, we're probably talking in the range of 30 million at this point to build, the design and build that bridge.
Okay.
Maybe more. But what's coming? I want to just generally talk about what's what we're working on and thinking of overall. And you'll start seeing this, if everything works out as part of this upcoming CIP and then really put in position for the 5-year. Is we have a circulation plan and transportation improvements plan for North Bay Shore, again, based upon the precise plan, of which the Google Master Plan, of course, was implementing a major portion of the precise plan. And we were really pushing ahead to deliver many of these projects as quickly as possible because the growth was happening quickly. Now we need to kind of sit back and look at which projects do we really need to keep pushing forward very quickly versus which we kind of pause and wait and see. There are two reasons for that. One is, some of them, it's going to be, when does it make sense? When does it make sense to put it in place? But the other piece is the slowdown in development is affecting our funding sources. A lot of these improvements are being funded by impact fees on the office development in North Bay Shore. If that slows down, it's going to slow down us getting those fees. Shoreline fund was another big piece of it. If development slows down, the growth in the shoreline fund will slow down. So that's going to be another piece of it. And there are other factors. So we are looking at it saying, what we want to come to council with is say, these are the 3 or 4 core infrastructure projects that shape the transportation system in North Bay Shore that we need to finish. We're well into design. We've done right-of-way acquisition, and they reconfigure things. And it's great to get them in before the development happens. It's harder to do. But there's a lot of other pieces to the circulation plan that probably should be timed and more wait for the development to start happening again, which also brings us back our funding sources. An example of that is another project that we had already assigned funding to that we hadn't yet started working on was the Landings Frontage Road, which was eventually going to extend over Permanent Day Creek and provide another kind of connection into the master plan area. But with the Landings office development, not proceeding at this point, and eventually there'll be another development on the site, the need to pursue that Landings Frontage Road. So we'll be looking at, okay, can we take that money away and put it on the 101 off-ramp realignment project, which is going to need more money. So you're going to see some shifting around that we're thinking, working on right now to present to council for your consideration. Again, we're not recommending dropping any projects. With the build out of the precise plan, they're all needed.
Yeah.
It's more when we do them. So I know that was a long response, but I wanted to but the reason this is coming to you tonight is we were nearly done with design and we wanted to get this out to bid like this spring and summer, right? So if there's general agreement on the strategy of right now, phase 1 is the utilities, bike and ped improvements. And by the bike ped, I mean the bike lanes that we were already planning to put in. We can finish the design still and get something out to bid soon so that we can get this going. While phase 2, if there's agreement that we should study this interim bike concept for the median, can follow.
Okay, that's it for my questions.
Great, thank you. I don't have questions. So I will turn this over for public comment. Would any member of the public joining us virtually or in person like to provide comment on this item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or approach the lectern. We will take in-person speakers first. Each speaker will have 3 minutes. And I see an in-person speaker on this as well as a virtual. So we will start with our in-person first.
Yeah, see, I don't even appear on the video. There I'm almost on.
Right.
Anyways, I'm Albert Jeans, of course. And this is going to be pretty short because, as you know, I just sent you guys an email last week proposing that the reversible bus lane be put on standby so we can free up more funds for the grade separation projects, although we now find out there's not so much that can be transferred. But in any case, yeah, of course, I support staff's recommendation that we do this phasing and put off the bus lane until we think it's really needed. Because I do still disagree with staff's assessment of how useful the bus lane would have been even in pre-COVID conditions. I won't go into that again. And it's just obvious right now that it's really not needed right now under the current climate with the how all the decreased mass transit, people telecommuting and all that stuff. I have no objections to the sewer upgrades and bicycle lane improvements for Shoreline Boulevard. I'm always riding over to Bay Shore. As far as the phase 2 bike lane in the median, I mean, I don't know what process you'd go through. I would like to see this bounced off the BPAC committee, or at least have some more public discussion. I mean, I ride my bike over there, and I can see how median would be attractive in some ways, but I'm also concerned about safety, because I did ride on a median bus lane in Foster City. There was one on one of the bridges that goes, from one island to another. But it was, it's very protected all the way. I mean, there's absolutely no way you could fall into a traffic lane or a car could come into your rear. Here, if we only have some low 6-inch curves or something, it'd be a little hairy to ride down this, road with two bicycles going both ways, the traffic going both ways. Suppose you have to swerve to avoid a bike, what's going to happen. So I don't know, if it makes sense to talk to BPAC before you start feasibility studies, just to see how the bicycle community thinks about it. That's just my, suggestion. That's all I have. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We'll now move on to a virtual public comment. April Webster.
Hi, April Webster. I'm sorry, I'm unmuted. Okay, great, thanks. A few things. I wanted to start by saying I think a phased approach is wonderful.
I didn't read her, sorry.
I'm not unmuted, I'm talking. Okay, I'll start again. I just wanted to say, I think following a phased approach it provides a lot of benefits over the waterfall approach, especially in getting things implemented and improving on them and being able to respond to changes. And I say that because there are changes coming down the pipeline. So especially for interchanges, which I have a few things to say about interchanges, actually probably more, but they're the most dangerous. They're like intersections. They're a really dangerous point of conflict given the speed and the on and off for both pedestrians and bicyclists. And Caltrans just released their design standards for complete streets. They have left interchanges, unfortunately, off the table, which means that it's going to be harder to get complete streets and to narrow lanes and put in those sorts of treatments. It's not impossible, but it's harder. The good news is that they have the Complete Streets team has formed a sort of like a sub-team to evaluate the 16 different types of interchanges throughout the state. And they're looking to provide some best practices, and that should be coming down the pipeline by next fall. I would also suggest that there's some more progressive designs coming from Caltrans from District 4, which is what we're part of. As part of their bike plan, Jasmine Stitt, who's leading that, has put together some really nice examples of best practices, which include a partial clover leaf, squaring off the freeway, the ramps at the on and off ramps, grade separated crossings among a tight diamond, amongst other things. So please take a look at that as reference. The draft has been released. And then as a bicyclist and a pedestrian myself, I would ask maybe if in the interim, if we can't get to the state of some of these more progressive designs, maybe consider something like a bike instead of a ped. What's it called again? You basically shut down all the lanes and everyone either walks across or everyone bikes across. And then that reduces any sort of confusion or conflict because it's just the bicyclists moving or just the pedestrians and not the cars. I think that could provide a lot of benefit, and maybe making it default that bicyclists, if there's a light and a sensor.
Sorry, your time is up.
No problem. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, there's multiple people with their hands raised and me here. Sorry about that. So next is Valerie Fenwick.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Sorry, I was getting a call at the same time you called my name. Thank you so much. I am on the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, but I'm not speaking on behalf of that committee. I'm speaking for myself. I really love this idea of doing a phased approach. I think it's really important to do it this time. And I just like to remind the CTC and others that, you know, the more than 20 years I've lived in the Bay Area and specifically in Mountain View, we've had lots of tech downturns. We had the dot-com bubble burst. We had the 2008 as well. And public works projects take time. If we are only designing them and planning them for what is in the moment, we will always be behind. And the number one comment I often hear from other residents is, you know, why didn't the city start this project sooner? So I love doing the phased approach. That is so important for the ebb and flow of tech industry here specifically. I think as we exit the pandemic and different, you know, phases of life happen for up in Shoreline in particular, with I know some of the housing developments that are planned up here, we'll see different traffic patterns on here. I am really in favor of this idea. I like testing out a bike lane on the median. I like also, you know, as we do this, design like where the pedestrians go. I'm one of the council members mentioned, I often just walk that area. I'm more likely to walk it than bike it, but that's okay. I see a lot of people on bikes as well. It is a major commute, and also it's a way people get into the park to have recreation. And one thing I did not hear either here, and it doesn't really apply to the TDMA, that was the last presentation, but concert traffic. Concert traffic has not gone away. And by not being able to move things, you know, a dedicated bus lane with a bus that just took people from like certain spots to the concert and back. I know we're not talking about the bike lane right now, but that is something, that concert traffic is horrendous. I know we're out of concert season right now, but that's one of the reasons why I primarily walk that route, because I will walk there rather than drive any day. And I don't feel safe riding my bicycle home after an event there because of the car traffic. So that is something to keep in mind. I'm really in favor of this. Thank you so much. Just thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Bye.
Great, thank you. Okay, all right. Anyone else for public comment? All right, not seeing any more hands raised in person or online. I'll bring the item back for the committee. Responses to staff's questions, deliberation, and action.
I don't care. Okay, so question one is, do we recommend deferring the median bus lane, et cetera? And basically I say yes to both questions. And if there, yeah, and I did like what several people said about running it by BPAC to see if there are any additional comments. I do like the idea of the interim bike lane, and I would like to see if it could handle pedestrians, but if not, then I guess just for bikes. I think that's my comments for now.
Great, thank you. Committeemember Radczyk.
So yes, I do agree with deferring the reversible transit lane, and proceeding with the utilities and the protected bike lanes. I'm not sure I have a perspective yet on whether or not we should do a bike lane where the median is, an interim bike lane. I kind of feel like I need to understand what that experience would be like. And what would be the cost of that versus the cost of, I really like the separate bike ped bridge over 101. I think that would be very useful, especially during concerts, when so many people are trying to walk and bike over Shoreline, to have that completely separate. I think you would feel more safe, especially after the concert when it's dark. Yes, to have it completely separate. So when I think about what would the experience be, having bikes in the median, I don't know. It doesn't sound all that great to me, but if it is great, then I'd be for it. So I guess I feel like I need more information on that one.
But it's a study only that we're talking.
It's a
Is that
feasibility, right?
feasibility study?
What's recommended is we do a feasibility study first and then a decision could be made.
But
To
the
make a commitment
feasibility,
to it. And
so I think to me feasibility means, is it possible? Yes, it might be possible, but is it attractive and something people would use? Would that be part of it?
We can build that into the feasibility study.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think that would
there
be
are other examples in the area. You don't have to go too far. It's not like it's a different state. Monterey has a medium bike lane. And so they can evaluate that, you know, how is those users feeling that experience is, how would that apply to this specific location? It's, you know, again, it may not be a one-to-one, but we can incorporate that.
Okay,
So, and it'd be a two-step process. It's a feasibility.
yes.
We come back to council to confirm, you know, this is sort of the recommendations. Would you like to move forward?
So, and when I say attractive, I don't mean just physically attractive, I mean, is it attractive to people to use? Yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just wanted to clarify that. So that's good. I would want to incorporate that into the feasibility study then. So I guess, you know, doing a feasibility study would make sense. Yeah. Sorry, any other questions? Any other phasing? No, because then the reversible bus lane is phase 3.
Okay, perfect. And so that seems me. So for question 1, yes, I support the phasing. For 2, I think that, you know, I agree with where committee members are going. I think my biggest thing that I want to share with staff is that I'd like this to proceed forward. And so I think that many people were gonna have feedback on this topic. And so when is the right entry point for the feedback? Is it that this goes to CTC, we make the recommendation to council, staff goes and does the feasibility, and then we kind of include feedback or other community members? Or at what point are we going to have that? Because I think it had a lot of input before, it's gonna have a lot of, and I wouldn't want us to lose the funding options or slow anything else down. And so really look to staff on when the right entry point is for the feedback, because there is going to be that from the community. And so is it when we actually have something to react to versus, you know, theoretical, hypothetical impressions that we may have in our mind, you know? So that is, I get what I put under question 2 for things for staff to explore. Yes, the usability and the likelihood in that feasibility study, but also at what point? Because one of the things that I have been thinking about is, you know, the user experience, and I do cycle out on Stevens Creek Trail, and I do bike Shoreline home because it's the only like lit way for me to get back. So I have, but I also understand the conflicts between pedestrians if you're on your bike and the vehicles, right? Because pedestrians start going into the bike lane. And so I'm pushed into the car traffic, right? So when I'm on my bicycle. So I think, you know, that's been my experience. So I don't know how we would do that. And I would look to the feasibility to be able to like answer some of those questions. You know, and I wouldn't want us to get a bunch of feedback and then go out to the consultant and then do the feasibility. I think it makes more sense to get the feasibility study first. Just
So-
thinking about it.
The steps that we're really looking at, is we want to get to council ASAP to agree on phase 1. Because we can't finish the design to put something on a bid on phase 1 until we've got buy off on that. So, you know, when we, you know, with your support, when we go to council, that'll be their main decision. Do you agree for now? We're deferring the bus lane, and these are just the elements we're gonna get out, finish the design package and get this out to bid.
Yeah.
And then if there's agreement that there's interest in studying the phase 2 concept, a feasibility study, what we would do is we'd have to create a budget for it, and that's usually a CIP. So we'd create a CIP as part of the roll forward, And that will be its own process that absolutely involves feedback, it involves outreach, it involves looking at, you know, how it could be designed, how it would feel to be using it, but we're setting it up to be its own process now. It's off on its own leg and it will have all that feedback and incorporation.
So really tonight it's so that you can move forward with phase one.
We really need to move forward to phase one. If there is interest in the phase two, then we'll incorporate that as
And
a
they'll have some
project
process.
and in the CIP, yeah.
Okay, great. All right, I'm supportive of those steps. I think that it makes the most sense and then it doesn't hold up the utility upgrades and everything else, right? Great. Did you have a question? Yes.
One more comment.
Oh, yes, go.
Are you done?
I am.
Oh, okay. You're gonna interrupt. I guess as part of the feasibility for the two, I would also want to know, do folks want us to just wait and do the separate bridge? Or do they want something interim? Because I think knowing what I know tonight, obviously I don't know all of this, because that's what the feasibility study is. But my gut feeling is I strongly prefer the separate bike pen bridge. And so I want people to know that that's still out there as an option, but it's a lot longer. And do they want us to wait?
My recollection of the bridge was the funding source, right? And not that there might be a private partner that could help fill the gap too at some point. So I don't know if that's still on the table as we talk about Gateway, but that's what I.
That was part of
Right,
it too,
yeah.
is hoping that, it could be developed as part of the gateway area, yes.
Okay, but I think Steph has what they
I
need
think
for now, unless you would like us to do a formal motion on.
Well, it is nicer when we can say as recommended by the CTC, so.
Okay, no problem. We can do that.
Yes. Let me do it, so I'll move that we go forward with the utility improvements and the protected bike lanes on Shoreline as phase one. That and actually should that just be the recommendation, Kathy? Are you gonna bring up the other stuff?
Well, it would set the basis for if we're gonna show it as a CIP project, the feasibility study.
Okay, and that we scope out the feasibility of doing a bike lane on the median. And then third is deferred reversible bus lane, transit lane.
I'll second it. It's almost 9:30. Yeah, we're ready. Okay, so all those in favor? Great, unanimous.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much to staff. Wonderful. So we'll move on to item 6, which is our committee staff announcements, updates, requests, and committee reports. We'll start off with item 6.1, which is our staff comments. John Cameron, Public Works Director, will provide staff comments.
All right, I will keep it short and sweet. Take off the name, put a different name on. So yes, effective Thursday, I will be interim or acting Director of Community Development. And Ed will be the acting Public Works Director until such time as a new Community Development Director is hired. Your next meeting is in May. I hope to be here with you, but I'll be here in spirit at least.
Wonderful.
Because we don't know, how long it'll take, but it's gonna be interesting and fun times. for
We're
Ed
optimistic
and-
that you'll be, yes, May will all return back to normal.
Wow, Ed will do a great job.
Yeah.
That's what we try, yes.
Congratulations. Great, thank you. Any other reports?
Okay, the announcement, just, yeah.
So we'll move on to item 6.2, committee comments. Do any committee members have comments or reports to share with the committee?
I have a very simple comment. you know, the staff reports, good as they are, they, content copying is disabled, and I usually copy them into some notes from my, you know, from my council reports, and I'm not able to do that. Can we not have copying disabled? I mean, nobody else does that.
That's data, yeah,
Oh,
that's
is it?
document processing.
Ah.
That's a bigger discussion
Oh,
because
okay.
all of our reports go through doc and then they lock them down.
Well, why would they be doing that to the CTC reports and not to the council?
Well,
Staff.
it should be handled exactly the same as the council because our council reports, we do the same process. We send a document processing and we get them back.
Okay, well, I'll bring my comments
I don't know
somewhere
any
else.
different now.
And they send us the PDF version with, to post, just like they do for
Mhm.
council reports.
Yeah.
That's odd that they would end up doing that, but I can copy one and copy that. Anyway, I'll bring that elsewhere. Thank you for the information.
Yes. I noticed that too. Okay, any other comments? Okay, would any member of the public joining us virtually or in person like to provide comment on this item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or approach the lectern or take in-person speakers first if there are any. Let's see any. I don't see any virtual hands raised. So we'll close public comment on item 6 and move on to item 7, which is adjournment. Thank you so much for joining us. Our next Council Transportation Committee meeting will be on May 7th, 2024. Our meeting is adjourned at 9:28